Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Town of Los Gatos Town Council special meeting for June 29th, 2016. If you haven't already done so, please silence your devices. And Madam Clerk, if you could please call the roll.
Councilmember Marcia Jensen.
Here.
Councilmember Rob Rennie.
Here.
Councilmember Steve Leonardis.
Here.
Vice Mayor Mariko Sayak.
Here.
And Mayor and Chair Barbara Spector.
Here, and noting for the record that Councilmember Rob Rennie is appearing at this meeting remotely. If you will now stand and join me in the salute to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. We are now at verbal communications. I don't have any cards from anyone, so even though this is a special meeting and only has 2 agenda items, if you wish to speak on any of the items or on verbal communications, please submit a card. Having said that, if anyone wants to address us as verbal communications, you will have 3 minutes. Please come forward. Noting for the record, no cards, no one coming forward. We will now go on. I have a card coming up. Is this for verbal communications? No, okay. It's not verbal communications then. Yeah. So we are now at other business. And the first agenda item is to consider a time extension for story polls for the Phase 1 North 40 development applications. And then it's APNs 42407-024 through 027031 through 037, 070, 038, 083, 086, 090, and 100. Are we having a staff report this evening?
Thank you, Mayor. Laurel Prevetti, your town manager. Just very briefly, a reminder that back in February of 2016, the council did consider the applicant's request for a story poll exception. The council added certain conditions that are outlined in your staff report this evening and granted the story poll extension. Once all of the polls were to be erected, the applicant had a 60-day window within which those polls were to be maintained. Subsequently, in April, the applicant asked for an additional modification to the exception. The council heard public testimony, considered it, and denied the additional exception. The applicant subsequently completed the story pole installation per the original story pole exception in February. That work was completed and certified on May 2nd, which started the 60-day clock, which ends on July 2nd. You have received in your packet a desk item with correspondence from the applicant's attorney, as well as correspondence from town's members. The town has continued to receive correspondence after the 11 o'clock timeline. And just for your benefit, much of that correspondence was of the same nature as other public comment that came in prior in terms of concerns for the length of time that the story polls would be up. We are available for any questions, and thank you very much.
Thank you. A couple of questions before we look to the other council members. Could you just, to put this in context, could you just explain to us what the time frames are for this application under the expedited state law that is being used?
Right, so we have a complete application for the architecture and site application that was submitted to the town quite some time ago, as well as a vesting tentative map. Collectively, we've been referring to those as the planning applications. So the planning applications were deemed complete, I believe, in May. And that then sets the clock ticking under California permit streamlining laws. So we have a definitive time period within which the town must act on those applications. That means an approval or a denial. We are proceeding with Planning Commission hearings for July 12th. That will be the first, and we suspect of several Planning Commission meetings. The Planning Commission's role is one of a recommendation to the Town Council. They are expected to finish their work by middle to end of July, which then enables the Council to begin its deliberations as the final decision maker on the applications in early August, and we have tentatively scheduled August 9th for the first Town Council meeting on the applications. Under the state's Permit Streamlining Act, the Council must complete its decision no later than September 7th.
Thank you. Other questions of staff? Ms. Jensen?
Thank you. I just had a question regarding how this matter ended up on our calendar tonight. Was it a request by the applicant to take down poles early, quote unquote, or was it an action independently by the town to extend the length of time that had previously been approved to keep the poles up?
I think perhaps the mayor would like to
I can
address that one.
respond to that.
Mhm.
I received a request to consider the story pole extension. I understand other council members did also, and I understand staff did also. So since we were having a special meeting, I placed it on the agenda.
Can I ask the mayor a follow-up? You said you received a request, and I guess that my question really is because of the correspondence I've received, and I want to make sure that it's clear for all of us, whether it was a request by the developer or whether it was a request by a member of the public.
It was not a request by the developer.
Thank you.
Other questions of staff? Seeing none. All right, this is agenda item 1. And I have some cards, and it looks like I'm getting more. And I will ask staff to make sure that when you get the cards, it has an agenda item number on it. All right, first one, Roy Moses. Roy Moses. This is the story polls, correct?
And I heard about this meeting that they wanted to take down the story poles, and I don't have all the specifics, but you kind of explained it just a few minutes ago. And my concern is that I would like to see the story poles remain up as long as possible. We have a big meeting on the July 12th, and as you probably all know, because you've received correspondence from us, we do have a committee that is working to try to work with the council and the planning commission and everything to make sure that what maximum amount of time so that we can really know the impact and show the impact that it's going to show from a visual standpoint. And then it also will also relate to the amount of people that are planned on being in that space, both commercially and residentially. So I would just like to have you give us every consideration to keep those poles up as long as they can. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no questions. Jack Van Naden.
I would be the opposite of Mr. Moses. I would like to see the polls stay on schedule and come down. This subject has been drug through the mud for a long period of time. There's no sense in running this thing out. There's some petulance about this. People aren't getting their way. The thing has been vetted for years. And I think if we extend this beyond this July 2nd date, that all we're doing is cowing to some people that aren't getting their way. Thanks.
Thank you. Lucille Weidman, or Weidman?
Bill Weidman, 215 Carlister, Los Gatos. I guess I'm in the petulant group, with all due respect. I would like to just succinctly say that we are extremely concerned that if the developer of the North 40 property is allowed to remove the story poles on July the 2nd, it will signal to the residents of Los Gatos a misconception that the development of the North 40 has been approved. According to the policy, the story poles are to remain until final action has been taken and any appeals have been resolved. Our request to the council is for the story poles to remain in place until the application is resolved. And thank you very much.
Thank you. Barbara Dotson?
Good evening. My name is Barbara Dotson, and I live on Marchmont Drive. I'm hoping that you will extend the time during which the story poles are in place. As I understand it, general town policy is for story poles to remain in place until the project has been approved or all possible appeals have been used up. I don't understand why an exception has been made for this, clearly the most important and the most impactful project the town has ever faced. I'm concerned that if the story poles come down, people who aren't following the North 40 issue closely will conclude that the issue has been resolved. And I think people need to continue to have the information that the polls provide. I just want to mention that when I went around with flyers about the North 40 in my neighborhood, there were still people who were not familiar with the application, and I think that is just one further reason why the polls should stay up. There are people who, for whatever reason, have not been following this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question from Ms. Jansen.
Ms. Dodson, when did you go around and find that people were not aware of the project, before or after
well,
the polls?
After the polls were up.
And when was that?
Was before the first planning commission meeting. So that would be March
In
30th.
March?
Yeah.
Since then, have you heard of people that are not aware of what's going on?
I haven't gone around again, so I don't know.
Thank you.
Seeing no other questions, Angelia Dorner.
Hello, Angelia Dorner, a proud resident of the Almond Grove. I think the story poles need to stay up until this application is resolved one way or the other. I wrote a long email to you all after the Planning Commission meeting that was initially held on this and felt that no due process had been followed as it relates to residents of this town, in that the story poles were not complete at that point in time. So any information, even in connection with that meeting, as far as I was concerned, was somewhat invalidated. My feeling is that having attended the Planning Commission meetings a lot, especially recently on some of these really contentious issues, other non-40 contentious issues, it's really important to go back after you've heard testimony and you've heard comments and you've heard other people's perspectives, to just go back and once again be able to look at it and reflect on those comments and digest them into your own context and your own perspective. I've done that a number of times with the things on Bella Vista and up on Highland, and the story poles that are still up during that process, I think, are extremely important. I think that knowledge of the North 40 or not really What could you do if they don't know about it by now? But I really do feel that it's just important to do that. And who does it hurt? Who does it hurt other than the people who would like to be able to go back and revisit those polls during this process and to reflect on how it impacts their thought process as it relates to this application? The only people it benefits are the residents of this town. I don't know who it hurts. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none. Amy Despars?
Hello, Amy Despars, 267 Long Ridge Road, uptown, right by the North 40. And I'm here to ask for, once again, no extensions or exceptions. When I put my story polls up, I did not get any exceptions or extensions. When they were denied the first time, we had to move them, and I had to extend. I wish Joel was here because he was the person who made me do it. But, and I know many, many residents who had exact same experiences. We had to redo our story polls, and then we had to restart our 60 days. I even had a letter from all my neighbors stating that they approved and they were fine with it, and I didn't need to move my story polls, but I still was made to. The other comment I'd like to piggyback on is Barbara and her flyers. Just an email went around last week of in one of the many groups that I'm involved in of emails, and a picture of the project, and the woman so infuriated she didn't realize how big and massive it was, and she had just seen down here, and then she said, I'm glad I'm really looking at the story polls now because it's going to make me realize it's going to be double that size when phase 2 comes. So there are people out there that still are not aware of it. And I feel like we've just not had enough time to really talk about it and for them to understand the process. We're just residents here who put our trust in your hands. Unfortunately, it wasn't your hands. It was the people prior to many of you. So just please consider, we as residents don't get exceptions or extensions, so I don't see why a developer should. Thank you.
Thank you. Edward Morimoto?
Actually. Ed Morimoto, 460 Monterey Avenue. The news that the council was considering an extension to the story pole requirement for the North 40 Phase 1 development took me by surprise when I heard it on Monday. Part of my surprise was because of the last minute 2-day notice for this hearing. Knowledge that the timing of the Planning Commission and Town Council processes would far exceed the July 2nd pole removal date has been self-evident for weeks, if not months. But I guess what really surprised me is that this council would consider undermining the uniform application of town policy and its own decision-making authority at the request of some of its opposing constituents. The North 40 story pole installation and its 60-day duration has complied with the town story pole policy. Those who take issue with that statement cite section 2.h of the policy calling for the removal of the poles once action on the application and the appeal period is elapsed. However, they have failed to mention the policy also includes a well-documented exception process, which the applicants have followed to a T and through which gained approval for the plan. More importantly, the pole installation has fulfilled the stated intent of the policy to enhance understanding of the project and provide visual notification to the community of a forthcoming land use public hearing. Attendance at the meetings since the polls have gone up in March are a strong testament to the second intent. And I would posit that neither taking down the poles at the agreed upon time would threaten that impact, nor would extending them appreciably enhance it. In my mind, the policy and the council's approval of the story pole plan are tantamount to a rule of law, and I personally would be very troubled if my town's government would choose to violate our trust in that principle without extraordinary justification. But if that's not reason enough to uphold the approved story pole plan, I'd also like to share with you the impact of the story poles and the potential extension would have on the ground, so to speak. The vast majority of the 500 some odd poles are to be found on my family's property, and all but 18 of them have been in place for over 100 days. The pictures on the screen show 2 sections of our orchard, one without the poles and the ones with. The polls to date have already negatively impacted this year's walnut crop. Not catastrophically, but irreparably. The inability to use equipment to work the soil has hampered irrigation efficiency and led to the overgrowth of weeds harboring housefly populations which diminish usable crop yield. Additionally, the weeds and forest of guy wires provide an ongoing fire and human health hazard. Should the story poles have to remain longer, not only will these impacts continue to progress, but failure to begin soil preparation in July will threaten the entire harvest for those areas occupied by the poles. And of course, this is in addition to the burden placed on our tenants, who have had to endure the installation of story poles around and occasionally on their homes for nearly 4 months. For all of these reasons, I hope the council will affirm its original February 16th approval of the story pole plan and the removal of the poles by July 2nd. Thank you.
Thank you. Question. You were talking about the walnut orchard, walnut crop this year. Is it ruined now, or will it be soon ruined?
No, so the critical point for us is in the next month. Because of all of the weeds and the fact that we haven't been able to cultivate the soil like you see on the left over the past several months, we're going to actually have to start preparation of the soil for harvest sooner. So we need to knock down the weeds, till them under, allow them to, because, you know, for any of you who are familiar with harvesting nuts, you actually rely on being able to gather the nuts off the ground.
And I am. So on the left, is that last year this time?
No, sorry, I should have explained. The photo on the left it was 2 days ago on portions of the orchard adjacent to where the story poles are. The photo on the right was at the same time 100 feet over, looking into the area where the story poles exist.
Thank you. Well, Ms. Jensen.
Mr. Morimoto, you mentioned tenants that were impacted, and I'm just wondering, could you give us an estimate or an actual number of how many people are actually affected and/or businesses? I know that you had tried to reach an agreement with Bartlett tree experts, and I don't know where that is. So Ms. Dorner asked us the question, who would it hurt? And I just want to know from you, who are the people or businesses that you believe are impacted?
So I think it's probably only really appropriate for me to speak to our tenants. So that would include 2 households on Los Gatos Boulevard. In fact, they were 2 of the households where the contested additional poles were discussed back in April, as well as a tenant that is on the Lark Avenue side of the property. So it seriously impacts, I would say, 3 households in the sense that those properties are surrounded by the poles. Certainly, we have several residents on the farm proper, including family members, for which there is some distance between the poles and where the houses reside, but nonetheless, given that those people have free access to the farm, some of the safety hazards exist for them as well.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you. Sandy Decker? And I have 2 more cards, so if anyone else is going to address us on this issue, you should have submitted your card, or please do so.
Sandy Decker, Glen Ridge. You know, the people of this town, knowing that's the largest piece of land to be developed, knew someday it would be. And the hope was that when it came, all the things we talk about in this town as the kinds of things we care about, like open space and community and so forth, we could meet those needs on that piece of land. All of a sudden, various meetings were being held, and a whole bunch of people were really not aware of all these buildings, all of these meetings. And then the idea that this was going to be developed, but not really with the feeling of community, got around town fast. And something else got around that I thought was very, very painful. What got around was the feeling that the leadership in this town was going to let this happen. And mainly because over the last 10 years, the leadership in this town has let a lot of undesirable and not exactly what this community expected happen. So there was really a feeling, I think, of, and I know everyone's talked to people who said, this is a done deal, don't fight it. And then those poles went up. And when they went up, even if you felt like it was over, you felt like there was a chance. And suddenly people began to ask questions and were more involved. Suddenly it wasn't 40 acres, it was 20, and it was very dense and it was very intense. And the next meeting was important to everybody. And you saw that, you understood it. And as a group of leaders, and I hand it to you too, Ms. Privetti, you realized this town was very, very interested and wanted to be involved. You took a tremendous amount of time and money and put on probably the one and only in the 45 years I've been here, truly public meeting about something that was affecting everyone in this town. And it was extremely important. The voices changed. The voices in this town really believed that they were going to be served, if not served, heard. You take those polls down 10 days before the first procedural hearing on this particular application, and you will have lost that hope, you will have lost that voice, and you will have lost that opportunity, I think, to put credibility back in the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce McCombs?
Madam Mayor, members of the Town Council, thanks for the opportunity to speak. I live at 16160 Kennedy Road in Los Gatos. I lived there the last 40 years, 42 years, lived here all my life. I understand that you made an agreement with the developer to extend this, or to provide them with an exemption that allows them to remove the story poles on July 2nd. I think things have changed considerably since you made that agreement with them, not the least of which is the need for meetings to clarify and confirm what's going on. It's a clear indication that we still have quite a bit to learn, and I think we're still in the study process. And to deem this application complete, procedurally, technically, that may be correct, but I think in our hearts we all know we don't understand what's going on here. We don't have a grasp of it. We may think we do, but I'm learning something every day, and I'm spending 6 to 8 hours a day on it every day, every single day, and I can't even come close to grasping it. So God bless you for figuring it out, but I just believe that by the fact that we've taken this, extended it, required more study sessions, that's an indication that we need to extend the story pole exemption. And I think that, we need to extend the time where the story poles are removed. It's clear to me, and I hope that you see that too. We still have quite a bit to learn, and I think the story poles need to stay up at least until the end of August when we complete our town council meetings. And I implore you to consider this, please. Thank you.
Thank you. No questions? Donna Capobres?
Madam Mayor, council members, I'm Don Capobres, representing the North 40 Development Team. I'm neither here to ask for anything. Quite surprised to actually be here tonight. Just found out about the hearing yesterday, I believe, and just saw the staff report today. Had a debate amongst our team about whether or not I should even speak here, because we're not asking for anything tonight, but in respect for the process, obviously we have a big part of this. The right thing to do was to get up and address any questions that you might have. I will say this, the story polls have kind of been a game changer for the North 40 process. We do quite a bit of community outreach in the town. We are as accessible as any developer has ever been as a developer can be. And we have heard from many folks in town who we haven't heard from in the almost 9 years that I've been working on this. And so the story poll policy has worked. To the issue of who does it hurt, story polls has probably been the hardest thing that I've had to deal with to date, because there have been people impacted. I got up because you asked Mr. Morimoto about the tenants that we had to negotiate with. We've negotiated with tenants that would allow us to remove for a time frame that they initially wanted 10 days. If you remember back in the day, we asked for 4 weeks, you doubled it to 60 days. When we came back and asked for an exception, which was denied twice, the 18 polls that we couldn't get up for businesses who were impacted were asking for 10 days. Were allowing us to impact them for 10 days. And so that was denied.
And so here we are 60 days later for some of those polls, and 4 months later for the other polls. I think it's done what it was supposed to do, and that is evident by all the community outreach we're doing and reaching out to some new people. That was great, and we agree. It's a very good thing to be able to reach folks that we haven't been able to reach out to in 8 or 9 years. And so I'm here a bit on a filibuster. I'll forego the last 50 seconds of my time to be able to make myself available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Jensen.
Thank you. Mr. Kapobris, if the council were to determine that circumstances had changed, that, for example, our schedule had changed or input from the community had changed, and we wanted to require, leaving aside the legal issues, Mr. Faber, for a moment, what would it entail on your part or the applicant's part to actually keep those polls up through the town council meetings for the statutory period that the mayor asked Ms. Pavetti about earlier?
We're scheduled to take down the polls, and we'll give it one extra day for extra measure. We are scheduled to take down the polls on July 3rd per our agreements with our tenants. So to have this type of notice 2 days in advance or whatever, and to negotiate contracts or lease terms with tenants who are impacted before our 4th of July holiday, that would have to happen, and I'm not, there's nothing to legally compel me or compel my tenants to do anything on this front, so I can't guarantee, if you were to take action here, I can't guarantee I would be able to implement.
Follow?
Ms. Jensen?
As I recall, we had 2 hearings, one where we determined that the polls were essentially going to cover perimeter areas, and then there was a second meeting where we were requiring polls to go into interior areas, and I think that that's when the tenant negotiations came into play. And hopefully you'll correct me if my memory is wrong on that. So I'm wondering if the council were to determine that polls would remain on the exterior portion and allow you to remove those on the interior that impacted businesses, would you still have the same issue that you just described?
The vast majority of the perimeter is on Yuki family farms. So I think that property owner has already spoken in terms of the impact to them. I don't like correcting council members, but the interior requirement came at the original hearing. We had proposed just the perimeter. And then through outreach and conversation prior to our initial hearing on story polls, it became pretty evident through staff that that wasn't going to fly. And so at the time we were drawing boxes at the council hearing where we would be able to do more polls. It was at the original hearing where those interior polls were determined. Subsequent to that, that was the story poll plan that was approved. Subsequent to that, and we admitted to the fault, subsequent to that, we realized that the polls that were approved in that plan were in locations that were going to impact Enterprise Rent-A-Car, Bartlett Tree Company, Serrano Tree Company, Natural Bridges Landscape Company, Affinity Realty, and I think those are all the tenants. And so we came back after not being able to reach agreement with them and said we need a modification to the plan that was approved because we can't come to an agreement with the tenants. And we asked, and that was denied. We went back, tried to work hard with the tenants, figured out we could do something for a shorter time period. We can get some polls, but not all the original polls up. And we came back for a second time requesting a modification. That was denied. So this whole negotiation kind of happened over the course of months in terms of chipping away. And ultimately, we found some creative ways to get it done with the boom lifts that are out there that are holding up some poles that so that cars don't get impacted. But it took everything we had in terms of conversations and negotiations to we knew we had to implement the story pole plan as was approved. And we exhausted kind of all remedies to try to get there, and to extend beyond that, that original time frame is going to be very difficult.
Okay, thank you. I stand corrected.
Further questions? Mr. Rennie, he's had his hand up for a while.
Thank you. I apologize that I'm not there in person, Mr. Capobres. I've got a death in the family, so I'm taking care of my father. So my question, I guess the first one related to Mrs. Jensen's comments. So there was 18 poles that went up at the end. I think what she was leading to, or at least what I would ask is, could you take down those 18 poles that would then allow, uninconvenience or, the people that are, inconvenience by putting them up. Could you then leave all the rest of the poles up for some further amount of time? I realize your lawyer submitted a letter saying that we didn't really have the right, the town doesn't have the legal right to extend it. So I would then say, would you be willing to voluntarily keep most of the rest of the poles up until at least the first planning commission meeting or the possible, I think there's going to be at least two, so at least two of the meetings. From the testimony from somebody that, from the Yuki Farms, it sounded like they've got sometime in the next month they need to start tilling, but maybe we could keep them up at least another 2 weeks until we have the planning commission hearing. Could you comment on that, please?
So for the properties, so for the 18 poles, I would say that it's hard to commit to that without having conversations with the tenants specifically. So if all of the poles were removed that impacted Bartlett Tree Company, Serrano Tree Company, Natural Bridges Landscape, Enterprise Rent-A-Car, and the other tenants on the boulevard, which include tenants that Grosvenor does not have, that would be the Yuki family as well as Summerhill Home, that's one conversation. And that is the entire perimeter. That is basically everything that folks can see from the Los Gatos Boulevard perimeter. So that's one, Councilmember Roney, I'm trying to answer your question. The second issue is again having to do with the other perimeter, which is on the freeway, which the farm operations are impacted on. So again, without having conversations with all the tenants, I find it very difficult to give you an affirmative answer on that.
Mr. Rennie, other questions? Well, you can think. I have other hands up before. Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Mr. Capobre's understanding that there has been some evolutionary occurrences throughout this process, and then there's people who will say legal, not legal, right, not right, and all those kinds of things. When it comes down to what the public desires, I think there is this question of should we, and I just want to ask you to try to look at it not from the standpoint of being the developer of the project, but as a member of the public who might be attending planning commission meetings or council meetings in the future. And what would be your point of view in that regard? Would you prefer that the poles remain in place, or would you rely on some other means? Because a lot of times the public doesn't come forward until the last minute. And with council and what we did, we try to grant exceptions and do things in the past to try to be flexible. And then our meeting schedule has become pushed out. So it makes it very difficult for those members of the public who still might be coming forward, who might be attending the meeting, right, to try to understand what they're really looking at here. So could you comment on that?
Yep. As we said from the very beginning, we believe in the town story pole policy, and we wanted to implement it to the best that we could, which we did, and it's done. In addition to that, unlike any other program that I've seen in the almost 9 years that I've been working here in Los Gatos, we built a full-scale model that's been in display in Town Hall for 3 months, almost 4 months. It's now in display at the library. It gives folks a good sense of what is being proposed. We have photo documented every story pole on site. For a good chunk of these poles, the general public legally should not be able to see these because they're on private property and they'd be trespassing if they saw those interior poles. So we've photo documented every single pole, every angle from the perimeter that is available to the public. I would say, again, we believe in the story pole policy. We missed on 18 poles. We understand what happened, but we put those poles up by May 1st. And so from our standpoint, Planning Commission hearings could have happened subsequent to all of the story poles being up. The fact that a joint study session not on our application was required before Planning Commission hearings on our application were allowed to move forward. Again, there's a lot of contracts in place. There's a lot of insurance issues that we're dealing with story poles that have never been intended. And most of the story poles we've seen on a commercial standpoint, Wine Depot was up for 10 days. And they were not up by the time Planning Commission heard. They did not build a full-scale model, and they did not, to my knowledge, photo document. And so those story poles were never intended to be up more. Our first estimate was 4 weeks from our story pole company. We've entered into a weekly agreement with them to monitor and repair poles as necessary. I think they've done a good job because, frankly, our story poles have stayed up longer than anyone else's story poles in terms of not looking like an eyesore. I find it interesting. A lot of people comment that they need to go down because the story poles become an eyesore. In this case, for some reason, in North 40, they have to stay up. I get, Councilmember Leonardis, we are big fans of public process. We are big fans of being transparent and being accessible. These poles will have been up for the ones that folks have seen or will see, will have been up for 120 days. Not 60, 120 days. The only polls that have been up for 60 days are the 18 polls that Councilmember Rennie referenced.
Further questions? Ms. Jensen?
Mr. Kapobris, you mentioned that you photo documented the polls, and I'm wondering if a member of the public wanted to see those, where would they see them, and how would they understand, from the pictures without some tutoring, what they meant and what their impact was?
So we photo documented every single poll just to photo document that every single poll was up. We've also put together a book, which my partner is putting on the screen now, which includes a site plan with view corridors indicated in a legend in the corner. So every photo is accompanied with the legend in the corner, which tells you where you're standing and which view corridor you're looking at. So if you took that book, and I think this will be available online to download, and you combined it with the model that's in the library, you would get a really good sense of kind of what you're looking at.
Thank you.
Other questions? Mr. Leonardis?
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Mr. Capobres, was this book something that was directed for you to put together by the town, or did you voluntarily put this together?
Maybe I'll look at the staff to answer that question.
We suggested that we do photo documentation after our experience with the Shannon Los Gatos Boulevard experience, because we thought that it would be important, given the time limit for the exception, that we have a place for photos to be located on our website. Staff today received the book that was just described to you, and we will be working to post it on the website. It is not yet available on the site.
Mr. Leonardis, other questions? All right. Mr. Capobres, I think in response to Mr. Rennie's question about June, or about the keeping the story polls up when the Planning Commission has their hearings, I think you said that wouldn't work for you. So let me clarify. You couldn't do that for part of the time, for a part of the story polls. What's your input on that? I'm talking about Planning Commission July.
We are currently, our contractor is scheduled, our negotiations with our tenants and the verbal agreements and written agreements in some cases with the tenants are currently on track for removal of the poles on July 2nd.
Okay. Thank you. Get this thing working. I don't see any other questions. Thanks. Next speaker, Linda Kaplinger.
Hi, my name's Linda Kaplinger. I live at 243 Jones Road and at 326 University. I didn't come prepared to speak this evening, but in sitting here listening to Mr. Morimoto speaking about his trees, I couldn't help but understand that it sounds like he has a potential financial impact due to the walnut crop. But if that's going to be a point of consideration in this, it seems like perhaps exploring some sort of green opportunity, such as goats or something, to take the weeds down, since they're precluded at this point from rototilling or, bringing in other heavy
Ms.
machinery.
Kaplinger, would you direct your statements
Oh,
towards us,
sure,
please?
sorry. It just seems that there should be some sort of way for him to explore that rather than that being a determining factor. Just wanted to make a comment, but that was about it.
Thank you. I see no questions. Rod Teague.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do agree with Don. Polls are an eyesore, but they're there for a reason, and they're there as a precursor as to what is going to be there permanently. And I think I understand the developer's frustration. I understand property owner's frustration. However, I think based on the rosy vision that the specific plan calls for the North 40 and what's actually there and what's represented there, and the public awareness that's been created by the story polls, I think every moment we can keep them there brings a greater level of awareness. There does seem to be a little bit of a theme, though. I remember the trees were all sick and old, and they had to be plowed down anyway. Suddenly they're needing to be tended to, and as if they were going to be existing there for eternity. Also, the renters of the property, I believe that there's many of them that are concerned about being displaced, and I'm sure that whatever public process would help them remain in their properties longer, it seems to me they would be in favor of that. So just asking for an extension, and thank you.
Ms. Jensen.
Mr. Teague, thank you for coming. I'm just wondering, I know that, for example, on Town Not City website, there's been quite a number of pictures of story poles, et cetera. Mr. Kapobras just mentioned a book, and I'm wondering whether you might consider publishing it. But I'm wondering those things really in terms of, do you think that if the council were looking for a compromise that would allow some poles to stay up and some poles to come down, such that tenants might not be impacted or certain areas of the orchard might not be impacted, could you envision any such compromise, or would you think that all poles have to stay up?
Of course, absolutely. If there is a legitimate concern with residents and harvesting and so forth, I've heard several different stories. So, some of those poles, especially the most important ones, I feel like rather than taking them down, I feel like they should be resurrected for another duration of time, because I've noticed that the flags that you could barely see in the first place have all faded. You could barely see the flags that represent some of the largest structures in the center of the North 40. So, but with regards to your question, it's a compromise, and I'm
So you think that there is a room for a compromise here, a reasonable compromise, or do you think that all the poles should remain?
Well, I think they should all remain, but if we had to compromise, I could live with that too.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you.
Thank you.
I have one more card, unless somebody brings up some cards. Andrew L. Faber.
Thank you. Andy Faber, Berliner Cohen, 10 Almaden Boulevard. I represent Grosvenor and Summerhill. I've sent you 2 letters. I apologize for sending them kind of late, but we just got notice of this and didn't have time to send them earlier. Normally, I would try to do that. But I want to just emphasize the point I tried to make in the letters, which is that the town council really has no jurisdiction to require an extension of the polls. As the staff report states, we have a vested right. Your exception that you granted in February says 60 days. They've been up 60 days at great expense, as Don Capobres has said, and difficulty. And if you go out and look at the boom trucks up in the Enterprise parking lot, it's kind of incredible, actually, that the poles don't reach the ground because cars couldn't drive through. It's obviously not a desirable way to do story poles. They've been up for months now. There are over 500 poles. There are thousands of guy wires. It's a very complicated situation. But we've complied fully with the town policy, and the town policy doesn't give the council the right to change anything at this point. The town council's involvement is through the exception process. We applied for an exception, which you granted in February. That's the operative one. We applied for another one because a mistake had been made in the suggested location of the poles. You denied that. So we're still operating under the 60-day policy. Although, as Don says, 96% of the poles have been up for almost 4 months now. It's only the last 18 that have been up for 60 days. So the bottom line, I think, is that you set up a system, you granted a permit, we've relied in good faith and at considerable expense. I cited some cases in my letter today. The Woody's Wharf case says, needless to say, changing the rules in the middle of the game does not accord with fundamentally fair process. Kind of a colloquial way of saying it, but the fact is that you required a pretty difficult and harsh thing to be done, which we did. We complied fully. And they served their purpose. If you think of the thousands and thousands of cars that drive by every day, there have been millions of views of these poles. And they obviously have alerted the public, which is what they're supposed to do. The public has gotten much more interested in the project, and that's appropriate. So the bottom line from our perspective is we've complied with your policy. The polls have served their purpose, and we don't think that you have the ability at this point to ask for anything more, nor is there any reason really why you need to ask for anything more. Thank you.
Questions? I do. Ms. Sayak.
Thank you, Mr. Faber. I tried to digest your letters as much as I could, but I just want to make sure I understand. The impression I got from the letters as well as the discussion today is, regardless of what we decide tonight, it is your opinion that legally nothing has to remain after Saturday.
I think that's correct, unless the applicants agree to some modification, which I understand they're not proposing to do at this point.
And just one question. You mentioned permit, but it's my understanding there's no actual permit that was awarded for these story poles. It was merely, an exception on our part on our own story poles, giving you an exception, but there was no actual permit that we awarded to you and your applicant, correct?
In a technical sense, yes. However, as the staff report points out, which I assume is language from your city attorney, that the approval you granted is in the nature of a permit. It was permission for us to do something and requirements that we do it in a certain way. And we acted in good faith reliance, fulfilled all of the conditions. So the vested rights doctrine, in other words, the fact that once we have done it, we have a right to say that's it without further changes, would apply. And I think that's what the sentence in your staff report means, and that's what I tried to elaborate in your letter, in my letter.
And if I may, one more question. Just before we close the public hearing, I just want a clear understanding. The 18 polls that Councilmember Rennie had just mentioned, those are the 18 polls that came back to us in our second review that basically impacts businesses and residences that are currently living and working there. Is that correct?
Those polls do. That doesn't mean that those are the only polls that
Correct,
impact
I
them, though.
understand.
That's
I
correct.
understand. And so if there is further discussion about these 18 polls and trying to look for a compromise, could you actually put back on the overhead where these 18 polls are? And would it significantly alter the viewscape for those that are trying to understand the magnitude of what this proposed application would be? Would you happen to have
I think
any
that's a question I'm going
documents?
to have to punt to Don to explain to you.
Would it be possible just before the close of the hearing?
We will go back. Let's finish with Mr. Faber. Do you have other questions for him? And
No,
then,
that was it.
all right, other questions for Mr. Faber? Mr. Faber, I have a question or two
Yes.
for you. You talked about vested rights, and it was in your letter, and it was in your letters. Vested right in what? That is a question. What is the vested right in?
It's a vested right to comply with the conditions that are granted and not have them changed in midstream to require additional expense and inconvenience and additional actions be taken. For example, it was very costly to put up these 500-story poles and to maintain them, to make deals with the tenants for the additional 18 and others. That was a lot of cost and expense. Premised on doing it for 60 days. Specific deals were cut with the story pole company and with tenants, premised on the terms of the approval that you granted on February 16th. So I believe, and I think your city attorney believes, that the applicants have a right to rely, and they have relied on the terms of that approval. And therefore, they have a vested right not to have that approval changed to their detriment to additional expense and effort that they would have to expend. And I think that's the vested right that we have.
In the approval?
In that approval, yes.
Okay. Now, you also testified that, I think, I was writing quickly what you were talking. You used the operative one, and you said February says 60 days. What were you talking about there?
I'm talking about that the motion on February 16th, that you approved the exception that was required, the first exception that was requested, said the polls remain up for 60 days after they are certified as all being up. That certification occurred in early May. So the 60 days starts from the May, but the developers were working as soon as you got that approval. In fact, what happened is they immediately started working with the tenants. And in March, they came back to you and said, we're having trouble with these businesses because we realized that we made a mistake. That's what, as Don was mentioning, that some of these poles are going to have to go in the parking lots of the business, and it's a real mess. But so most of the poles had been put up by that time. They were mostly put up in March. 96% were, as I understand, were put up in March. The rest were put up after you denied the exception, and Don said, all right, we've just got to figure out a way to do this.
Okay, and my sense was you were talking about the February motion that did reference the 60 days, but I'm sure that you took a look at this motion, and it says the one we approved was said, keep the story poles up for 60 days as closely sandwiched around the Planning Commission meetings. And that is different than just 60 days. It also has a provision for sandwiching the Planning Commission meetings. Can you speak to that, please?
Sure, yeah, and I do have it. It's right here. I agree with your your reading of the wording. Sandwich around the Planning Commission meeting is rather imprecise language, but at the time, nothing prevented the Planning Commission from going forward and having those hearings. As Don mentioned, those were delayed not because of any action of the applicants, but because the town felt that a process should occur where there should be a study session, not on our application even, but on the specific plan itself, which you had in June. So there probably was an expectation that there would be Planning Commission meetings within those 60 days. But the applicant specifically had requested a shorter period of time. The council said 60 days. And by the way, that's been on the town website for weeks now. It's on the home page actually for months, that it's 60 days and that the polls will come down after July 2nd. So I think any member of the public would understand that the town's interpretation of that language was that the 60 days goes from the May certification to July 2nd. And I think so I understand this language exists, but I don't think it can be used in a lawyerly way to say the polls have to extend further, because who knew when the Planning Commission meetings would be, but they could have been within the 60 days, and we hoped they would have been. So that's my analysis of it.
Thank you. Ms. Jensen.
Mr. Faber, I was interested in your answer regarding vested rights. Would you agree with me that a vested property right is different than a right to rely on an action that a council takes in interpreting its own rules and policy?
You know, I think it's an interesting question. We do a lot of work of vested rights because it comes up all the time in land use practice. And also, as you may know, I'm the acting city attorney of Gilroy, so I see it from the other side as well. There are two kinds of vested rights, as I understand it. One is the right essentially to develop and build your project in a certain way. And that's what many of the vested rights cases deal with, where the zoning is changed after you started building, for example. And the court says you have a vested right, they can't change the zoning. The vested right that we're talking about here, and that I think that Rob refers to in the staff report, is really the fact that if the town council issues something like a permit, it may not be called a permit, but it's a right to do something and an obligation to do something with certain rules, and the developer complies with those rules, I think they have a right, and I think Rob thinks so also, called a vested right, not to have those rules changed in the middle of the game or at the end of the game. So in answer to your question, this is that kind of vested right, in my opinion.
Mr. Faber, I'm sort of like engrossed in this motion that we approved last February.
All right.
When I found it, I realized that neither staff nor council nor public had referenced the second half of the motion. Everybody kept talking about the 60 days. And they weren't speaking to the fact that these 60 days were tied to sandwiching before and after the Planning Commission meeting. And so I'm still thinking about that and why we can ignore the part of that motion that speaks to the netting being up before and after the Planning Commission meeting.
I think there are two reasons, or several reasons. One is that we all have interpreted to mean 60 days, and as I said, the town did too, and it's been on your own website. Secondly, though, as you recall, under the Permit Streamlining Act and the Subdivision Map Act, the actual timelines to approve this project were much earlier than the ones that Ms. Pervetti mentioned. In other words, the end of July for Planning Commission and September 7th for Council. We agreed at the town's request to extend those timelines. This project could have gone to the Planning Commission and probably should have earlier. We agreed to an 85-day extension of time for Planning Commission hearings at the request of the town. And there's a written agreement which went to you in May that enforced that, or that established those deadlines. The September 7th deadline for council action is in that written agreement. So I think in that context, this Planning Commission language should be understood as, if we hadn't agreed to those extensions, you would have had to have the Planning Commission meetings, or the project would have been deemed approved.
Ms. Sayak.
Thank you. Just as you're engrossed with the motion, I'm engrossed with this discussion we're having. It because it's I think we're having a difference in the policy discussion, really. And I see your point about, you're talking about the Streamlining Act and vested property rights, but right now, what we decide on with story polls in no way affects the timeline of your actual application. And so I don't see the connection between the two. I see a discussion on our part of keeping to our story poll policy, and yes, there's this discussion of whether or not there was an exception granted in February, but I don't connect the two with your vested permits, because your applications are proceeding as they are going to proceed based on the agreements with the extensions we all signed to. So again, I'm having a trouble connecting how in any way we're violating those permit requirements. So.
Well, I'm not saying you're violating anything at the moment, but I think the connection is through Mayor Spector's questions about the language about closely sandwiched around the Planning Commission hearings. And again, my analysis of that is that at the time the 60 days was agreed to, the reasonable expectation was that there would be the hearings within 60 days. And in fact, that would have been required by the Permit Streamlining Act and the Subdivision Map Act. However, the town decided on a different process and decided that we should have the study session in June on the specific plan, not even on the project, and that our hearings should be delayed until after that study session. We didn't ask for any of this. We were prepared to go forward and have Planning Commission hearings within the 60-day period. So I think that's the connection. And based upon that, we relied on that and entered into a number of contracts for 60 days. and to on one day's notice, tell us at a special meeting that we should have to go try to renegotiate contracts over a holiday weekend for additional time and considerable additional expense, I think is unreasonable. And I don't think you have the power to do it or to impose that.
And just one, and so the contracts that I guess now I'm clear. So I'm just confirming the contracts that you're referring to are the contracts that you have with your tenants. So?
With tenants and with the company that does the story poles and the maintenance and the removal, yes.
Okay, thank you.
I see no further questions. I believe that, I don't even remember which question it was, but somebody wanted Mr. Capobres to share some information with us.
It had to do with Councilmember Sayak's question about where the business poles were, or the 18 poles, I think.
All right, and somebody is going to show that to us.
John, are you willing to do that?
Madam Mayor, Council, we're going to try to improvise. We weren't planning on asking for anything at this hearing, so, and I was not planning on speaking. So we're going to try to improvise. I'm available to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Sayak.
So the questions I had were, as an afterthought to Councilmember Rennie and Councilmember Jensen's point of which story poles specifically are the ones that impact the tenants that live there and work there most directly. That if you can show that to us so that I have a better idea of
Awesome.
who
This is
who
great.
is at harm right now.
Let me start with this one. Remember the flashback to red dots and yellow dots. Our primary areas of concern were existing businesses in what's called Area A. This is primary, there are other areas, but primarily in the area of the buildings and businesses in Area A. So the tenants who are impacted here, Building A2 is Natural Bridges Landscape Company, Bartlett Tree Company. They have their administrative offices there. To the right of Building A2 in the Brown Building, so these are already exempt, but they all are impacted because this is all of their parking lot, is Enterprise Rent-A-Car. As you move further back, kind of moving north, or it's actually west, but towards the red dots and yellow dots, that is a very, and that's an actual single-family residence that's in the middle of that with a tenant, two tenants who are in that house. And then behind, Wendy, to the left of that is Enterprise Rent-A-Car's car wash. And then to the up towards Building A is the maintenance yard for Bartlett Tree Company. To the left, down, is the maintenance yard for Serrano Tree Company. And so those are, it's a circulation pattern for Enterprise Rent-A-Car, like I said, all the tenants that we just named. The reason, I guess it's a fair question to ask how we actually were, because we asked for 2 exceptions before finally being able to make your original plan that you approved work. One of the main issues that we had is we terminated a lease with a tenant, which could have stayed there for a lot longer. That lease termination allowed us to kind of free up some area in the parking space to be able to move Bartlett Tree Company trucks out and kind of reallocate parking spaces. We didn't change the parking lot, but we reassigned parking spaces based on 12 parking spaces becoming free by terminating a tenant. That's the primary area, and that's just, that is where all the boom lifts are with the story poles right now. And those are tenants of Grosvenor. We own that property. Building B2 is tenant of the Yuki family. That gentleman owns a woodworking shop. He's been there for over 25 years. He does need access in and out of his woodworking shop, which is on the back side of the property. Our original proposal was just to do the yellow dots. The plan that town council approved required all of the red dots and the blue dots, and that's what's out there now. But that is a sea of guy wires in his yard impeding access to his woodworking shop. Third area is towards the gas station, starting from the left side here. That is owned by Summerhill Homes. And then kind of moving to the right, that is a tenant of the Yuki family. We had proposed, I don't know if this one isn't actually right, but there are poles that are in the middle of driveways, in the middle of backyards, in the middle of front yards that are not depicted here, that we worked out agreements with these tenants. There are things like graduation parties. There are things like, and I know there was a comment made about other members or other tenants on the site. These are not those tenants. These are people who were impacted because of graduation parties and other parties that they wanted to have in a very nice yard. And these were difficult conversations to have. Again, those are tenants of the Yuki families. So those were the areas that we came back for and asked for modification to the original proposal. And they're not exactly depicted on those charts, but closely enough. We tried to get some leniency on those. We were denied twice. We found a way to get it done, and those were very, very difficult polls to get up.
Ms. Jensen.
Thank you. The map that had the colors with the circles, the colored circles, were the red with the X's. We keep coming back to the 18 poles. Are those the 18 poles? Or are they something different?
Yeah, so there, in general, I don't know if they're exactly these dots because we had a couple iterations where we came back to town council. I believe those are the dots we couldn't get up, or the poles that we couldn't get up compared to the plan that you approved and were operating under. The related fact, and why I'm having difficulty with that, is how poles are supported with guy wires depend on other poles. And so if certain poles are removed, it changes there is a bit of a cascading effect to the rest of the poles. And that's why I don't want to limit it to just 18 poles, because locations might have to change. We had proposed different locations to secure them, to fix them, or to secure them to fix buildings or fix fence poles. That was denied. And so it's not just poles, but it's also kind of the location. We were trying to limit, the guy wires are kind of what's really impacting, in addition to a pole being right in the middle of a driveway, there's also the guy wires. And the guy wires are about, as you recall the conversation, if it's a 25 or 35 foot pole, the guy wires have a radius impact of about 25 to 35 feet. And so as you start taking poles out, we also have to worry about where the guy wires resulting from the remaining poles.
Ms. Jensen?
Can I ask you a follow-up before you start? Given your explanation, and if at least one member of the council was looking for some kind of a compromise, hopefully reasonable compromise position, if the council were to essentially retroactively adopt the position that you asked for that was denied at the second meeting, would that allow you to free up these tenants and change your polls? Ms. Baker, you're shaking your head.
Good.
I'm sorry, Wendy Baker with Summerhill Homes. So the 18 polls, all of this would have worked with a 60-day time frame that we were talking about. But now we're talking, 10-day originally is what we proposed. And then 60 days was what was upheld. Now we have tenants that we don't have any agreements with to move beyond this. So even though there might not be red dots shown here, because my tenant had agreed to it, they aren't in agreement with moving beyond July 2nd. So it's very challenging for us to sit up here with, again, a day's notice and say, well, yeah, we'll go back to them and ask for something else. So that's why these 18 polls that we had originally asked for, and if we could just go back to that original approval or request for an exception to the R exception, we can't really go back in time because we're actually only asking for 10 days, and then it was never granted. So it's a little tricky.
One
That
more
makes
follow-up,
sense.
I'm sorry.
Ms. Jensen, yeah, because I would have a follow-up. Go ahead.
And this will be it, I hope. So either Mr. Kapobris or Ms. Baker, could you then tell me, you're talking about contract negotiations. I understand that that's going to be extraordinarily difficult, given the timing. What poles could remain on this property? And pardon me, Mr. Morimoto, but I'm excluding the Yukis for a moment. That would not impact contractual agreements that you could keep up that are on property controlled by Grosvenor, Summerhill, and/or the Yuki family.
I can say for Summerhill's behalf, and I believe also for Grosvenor, that only the poles on the Yuki property do not impact additional tenants, but there are some tenants within the Yuki property that are impacted. So it's not exclusively just.
And I'm sorry, would you just show
Sure.
on some map that makes sense where that would be, where they could remain?
I'm not suggesting any remain because Mr. Morimoto got up and spoke that he would not like any to remain.
Just
not-
hypothetically.
Hypothetically, I would say that any tenant that the Yukis have that may be on their property but is not orchard land, for example, where you could put guy wires more easily, I would say we cannot control that. They're their tenants. Summerhill has agreements, as does Grosvenor. The tenants all along Los Gatos Boulevard and the tenants that Don spoke of. So anything along Los Gatos Boulevard, I would say we have no agreements to move past July 2nd. So the only area that now becomes of question is what Mr. Morimoto spoke of earlier, and he is not interested in keeping poles up in that area either.
So your answer is there are none that we can keep up.
Yes. I mean, we don't want to be those people. I don't like giving that answer, but given the contractual agreements and the agreements that we have with tenants, again, we had started with 10 days, went to 60 days. We're beyond 60 days. I have not spoken to one tenant out there about this issue at this point in time. And all of those poles that we're talking about are on tenant premises. There's nothing that I can do to legally compel them to do anything that they don't want to do. So without a conversation, without any of those tenants about our poles or on their premises, it's a challenge for us to answer at the microphone today.
Thank you.
Other questions? See none? Thank you. I have no other cards. And I see no cards coming forward. So I am now going to close the public testimony of this matter and look to the council. And I think I'll start, so give other people a chance to think through. Even though this was a shortened time frame for a council hearing, we received a lot. I received a lot of input. I believe we all received a lot of input, and some of it is very conflicting, and that's understandable. We have those who will say that don't grant the applicant an exception. Don't grant the applicant a story pole exception. That came to us a lot, but the fact is this council granted an exception on the story pole policy in February. Then you hear, well, we have an exception, and that exception requires 60 days, and we put the story poles up in May so that they can come down in July. Well, that 60 days is actually a very abbreviated version of this council's motion, which did say 60 days, but also added that those 60 days sandwiched the Planning Commission meetings. The Planning Commission meetings, as you heard, will take place in July. And so a sandwiching of the Planning Commission meetings as reflected in the motion, the 60-day motion, would be before and after that July timeframe. You hear terms like you can't do anything, council, because there is a vested interest involved. And there are different types, as we heard, of vested interest. And some might apply in this matter, and some do not apply in this matter. But no matter whether you're here because you want the council to extend the time for the story polls, or whether you're here because you want the council to allow the story polls to go down on July 2nd, the information that I have received, that I have read, that I have heard, is that it's not straightforward from anybody's point of view. And now it's all quiet. Ms. Jensen.
I just had questions. Ms. Pravetti, I hope you're going to be able to stand in for our town attorney, because there are legal questions. First one is, I was under the impression, and of course you can correct me if I'm wrong, that the town is always has the power to modify, implement, whatever it may be, matters with respect to a policy, that its own policy. So for example, Mr. Faber said we didn't have jurisdiction to change something. And I'm under the impression that we could always do something with our own policy. Am I right, wrong, or indifferent?
We do have the right to modify our own policy, but that presumes that we've followed due process and given adequate notice to the affected parties.
Okay, so it's not a question of power or discretion, it's a question of was there adequate notice given for this hearing?
It's one of the issues.
Okay. The second question I have is, if we were to determine that we wanted to, assuming for a moment that we have the power and discretion to alter a decision we made with respect to our policy, what standards do we apply in doing that? Do we have to make findings? This council determines that we have new information, we got it wrong the last time, we made an error. What is it? Is it like the Planning Commission appeal, or is it some other standard?
This would be, if we're talking solely about the story poll exception, since that is a policy, we do not have specific findings. However, I think the record would be our guidance, given the history of this particular exception and the fact that the Planning Commission did commence its hearing on March 30th. So the application is essentially running in parallel with the story poll exception process. If it is the will of the council to consider a further exception or other modification to the story polls, we would need to map out what that timeline looks like vis-a-vis the application hearing schedule that's now been set for both Planning Commission and Council, as well as our Permit Streamlining Act requirements.
Ms. Jensen, okay. Anybody else? Ms. Sayak.
Okay. So I'm going to work backwards. I'm going to work about the greater goal that I want to achieve, and then hopefully through town staff and through our legal substitutes, we can develop what the appropriate steps are. I think all of us would agree that we would like to have a planning commission where everybody walking into this chamber has the most up-to-date, accurate information available to them. And in an ideal world, that would include the most accurate story polls that can be reviewed. I understand that it's been up for 60 days, but I acknowledge that there are many people in our town who will come at the last minute, look at the story polls, and formulate their thoughts at that particular day. Now, there has been lots of confusion because of the way this process has happened. There was story polls put up, there was a planning commission that occurred where the story polls weren't even complete, and then at that point, I'd say we had we, the council, had information readily available that showed that there was mass confusion among our residents and that we needed to take a timeout and say, hey, let's get back on the same page. Let's figure out what it is we are trying to do, and let's give everybody, our residents, our businesses, our applicants, the same information so that they can come into the Planning Commission and begin the due process on the same page, basically. Now, I still want that to happen. I still want a Planning Commission to begin July 12th. It's scheduled. Nothing has changing that date, but I want to make sure that we begin that process where people are feeling that it's a legitimate process and no one is giving concessions to anyone and there's no favoritism, because it's not. It should be a fair process that no one is doubting from the beginning. And so in my mind, it seems like by whether it's an exception to this, to that, we should just have some story polls up. And what I'm looking to today is what can we have up without breaking legal contracts between the applicants that give our town as accurate a picture as possible on July 12th moving forward. I don't happen to have that answer today. I'm hoping someone, as we have these discussions, can help me to come up with some kind of a compromise. But I really do think we need to keep something up there so that people understand this is not over yet and that you still have an opportunity to weigh in on July 12th, as well as all the further meetings that will be happening until September.
Let me follow up on the Vice Mayor's comments. I also agree that it is in the best interest of the applicant and the community to allow the story polls to remain up on sandwiching on both sides of the Planning Commission meetings. I disagree in the sense that I don't believe we are changing anything. What we are doing is clarifying for the applicant and for the community when this 60 days begins and ends. It begins prior to the Planning Commission meeting and ends after the Planning Commission meeting. But I do agree that it is in everybody's best interest to have the story polls up, with the possible exception of those that the evidence may have shown are harmful or dangerous, so that the Planning Commission, so that the community can have the benefit of that input when they make decisions. And somebody had said, well, quit extending, stay on schedule. This would not extend, this would stay on schedule. So there would be no changes in that regard. So I guess what I'm looking for is a clarification to our exception, not an exception to our exception, so that this can go forward before the Planning Commission. Further discussion. Rob Rennie.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Spector. I agree. Actually, let me unmute because I'm getting feedback. Okay. I agree with Council Member Sayoc said. I'd say pretty much completely. To sort of shorten it and simplify a little bit is, from all this listening about the discussion on our legal standpoint, I don't think that it's that strong, and I think that it sounds like the app take the polls down on July 2nd. In my opinion, some polls are better than any poll, and I also like the idea of let's try to find, you could call it a compromise or find something that works, because we know for sure they're going to have to take them down on the houses of the ones related to the last 18 polls, although it may be more than 18 polls. We're sort of unsure on that. It was, the ones around the Bartlett tree operations and the house that was next to that Bartlett parking, and that the house B2 on there was to the right where there's going to be a restaurant. This is next to the gas station. We may lose most of those story poles. You know, I know that the Yuki farm needs to start working. I'm not sure that the inside poles add very much. Maybe the applicant can leave some up around the edges along Lark and along the freeway. I think that will, and if they could leave up the taller poles for the Eden housing portion of it, I think that's still going to give people the idea that something's going there. You really need to go look at the model to really understand what's going on. So I just feel like we should come up with something that's reasonable so that they who don't, you know, the developer who doesn't think that they need to keep the poles up will willingly keep them up. In other words, we won't end up in kind of banging our heads and everybody loses because the poles come down and then we get into a big legal net. So, so again, I'm looking for something more along the lines of what Councilmember Sack was talking about. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion? I'm gonna have to play poker with you someday.
I know, 'cause I always lose.
Ms. Sayak.
I'm gonna need staff help with this. It's difficult to make a motion when I don't know exactly, I don't have a diagram or anything to point to. I think, based on what I heard tonight, I think what I heard was that there's consensus among the council that some poles should remain, but we understand that there are some, we discussed at length, 18, it was pointed out, that has been shown to be detrimental to those that live there and work there. So it is my motion, and please help me if I, that the story poles on the proposed application will remain, with the exception of possibly the 18 that the applicant will work with staff to show is detrimental to those living and working in the immediate area, in the immediate area.
Vice Mayor, I'm prepared to second your motion, but when you say they remain for what period of time? I mean, for example, I've been talking about sandwiching the Planning Commission meeting. Are you talking about a lesser time, a greater time?
I guess I would, depending on who seconds it, I'm open to it. What I don't want, I don't know enough about story poles. I want to make sure that they remain safe and sightly. We have examples of story poles in town recently where they've just degraded and has looked awful, frankly. I don't want that. So I've heard evidence that it can only remain at a certain time. I don't know what that accurate time frame is, but I want story poles that depict the true picture, but is not unnecessarily unsightly and undangerous for those that are visiting the area.
All right, I'm going to, if the maker of the motion will, if the maker of the motion were to limit her having the story poles remain until the Planning Commission completes its work, and then with the, except for the 18 that we have been discussing, I will second that motion.
Then I will accept it.
All right, we have a motion on the table. Now we're looking for discussion. Ms. Jensen.
Just wanted to ask a question of Ms. Bravetti before I figure it out. What precisely, to the extent that it is precise, is the schedule upcoming for Planning Commission and potential town council meetings?
Planning Commission is scheduled to resume its discussion of the North 40 on July 12th, continue on July 13th, and conclude on July 20th. So they have those hearings set. assuming they need all 3 dates. Town Council has reserved August 9th, then we would continue to August 11th, August 16th, if necessary, September 1st, and then September 6th. So we have 4 or 5 dates for the council and 3 for the planning commission. We've polled both bodies, and all of these dates have been reserved on the deciding bodies' calendars. We've tried to work as best we could with schedules.
And also noting, adding to Ms. Pravetti, that our absolute deadline is September 7th, so we're working back from that. Further questions, Ms. Jensen?
One of them was the September 7th. I wonder if the maker of the motion and the seconder would be amenable to adding specific dates, because my concern is that we will, if we end up with something imprecise, such as the sandwiching, which is my fault, but I remember the discussion, which was trying very carefully to make sure that we had polls up around meetings. That did change, but that was the intent. But if we get to July 12th and the polls come down, we'll be here July 13th having the same meeting over again. And I don't want to be in that position, for one. I also don't want to be in the position of saying to an applicant or a developer X and then doing, Y, so that they now go forth and rely, not have a vested right, but rely on our decision and take actions based upon that, and then that changes. So I have some real concerns about that. I wonder how that's going to be addressed in the motion. And so I'm going to start with that as things that I want to see.
All right, we have discussion. There is a question as to whether or not the motion could include a dates as to, well, I guess would it be an ending date. So does the maker of the motion wish to speak to that?
Yes, it's perfectly reasonable. A decision has to be made by September 7th, that the story poll should remain till September 7th. So I would agree.
All right, well then I'm going to withdraw my second and look to see if someone else will pick up the second. As much, quite frankly, as I would like them to stay up until September 7th, I feel much more comfortable with the factual and legal record to have the story poll stay up during the Planning Commission consideration. So we have a motion on the floor to have the story polls remain up until September 7th, with the exception of 18 that have been testified to as being problematic. Is there a second to this motion? All right, that motion dies for lack of a second. Do we have another motion? Ms. Syak.
Okay, let me try another one. All portions of the motion will remain until, and the story polls will stay up until the first town council meeting, which is, Ms. Pravetti, do you mind giving me that date again?
August 9th.
August 9th, so that if there is an appeal, that at least, that it would not be an appeal because it's a recommendation. Thank you for correcting me. So that those that are following it will have the opportunity to use the town council as another opportunity to weigh in on the matter.
All right, I'm going to, based on that revised motion, which has the story polls remaining up until August 9th, I am going to second it because I think that is consistent with the exception that we originally gave. Now, discussion. Seeing none, I'm going to call the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, council. I'm sorry, I have one process issue here. Since we have somebody who is appearing remotely, staff, you need to remind me, and you need to do a roll call vote.
Councilmember Marcia Jensen.
I'm supporting the motion as a compromise. I do have concerns about the noticing that was given for tonight's meeting.
Is that a yes?
That's a long yes.
Councilmember
Yes with explanation.
Councilmember Rob Rennie.
Yes.
Councilmember Steve Leonardis.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Mariko Sayak.
Yes.
And Mayor and Chair Barbara Spector.
Yes. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Rennie, for reminding me. All right, agenda item 2. Report on pilot closure of South Santa Cruz Avenue to address cut-through traffic. I understand Mr. Morley is going to be making our staff report.
I will. Thank you very much. So we wanted to give you a brief update on the cut-through traffic efforts that we put forth over the last weekend and have on queue for the next 2 weekends as well, including the Monday of the 3-day weekend. So this is a brief summary of what we've seen. Quick highlights on the program as it was outlined by Council for staff. 3 weekends, as I said, the closure hours are from 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. And the closure is at southbound Santa Cruz Avenue at Wood Road, with the northbound access to downtown off of Highway 17 open and accessible. So through that, we've established a traffic circle at Wood Road to facilitate reception of traffic from Wood Road, traffic from the freeway, and redirection of traffic that makes its way to the closure from Santa Cruz in the greater downtown area. We've spent quite a bit of time doing outreach through social media, the news, and the biggest outreach through Nextdoor. We've had quite a bit of feedback through Nextdoor and interaction on pluses and minuses, especially in reaction to postings that the town and Parks and Public Works Department have made on Nextdoor. We've also had some successes with mapping technology, so programs such as Waze. Waze has, we've made some substantial inroads with some, we are now able to add closures to the Waze mapping system so that they show up on the mapping system. So for last weekend and the next 2 weekends, that closure will show up between 9 and 3, as will the closures at Tate and Massaul at Highway 9. Those are also programmed. Just as an aside, we've also added in closures, for instance, the closure that we have on Blossom Hill Road as well. So more and more information getting out to the residents. One other inroad that we've made with Waze is we've begun to have conversations with them about the status of our roads in their system. So for instance, Tate Avenue is seen as a more significant road to Waze for the town. It's a residential collector. In Waze, it was identified as a more significant street, and one of the reasons why Waze directed more vehicles to Tate Avenue. They've since sort of downgraded, if you will, that roadway, and we'll be tracking that to see if that has an impact as well over time. Of course, not all of the software is interactive, and that's been one of our challenges. Google and Apple have provide a much more difficult way for us to interact with them, so we're making those attempts as well, but have not been successful to date. Signage has been a big deal, and one of the areas that we identified as an important element of managing the traffic over the weekends. We identified signage locations in advance, and we made some modifications on Saturday early to enhance that. So we added significant signage and watched the changes, and we're happy with the modifications that were made. We also made additional modifications on Sunday. So for instance, on Sunday we relocated some of the message boards from the side of the road to the middle of the road to make them right there in front of folks as they were progressing through the downtown. And one of the areas that was extremely successful was the message board at University and Highway 9. we saw through the numbers, and you'll see those in a second, that we diverted quite a bit of traffic from the highway, from University onto Highway 9 headed towards 17. A couple images of the things that we did. This is a message board on Santa Cruz Avenue. This one was the message board that we moved into the center lane. When you take a picture, it doesn't show all of the letters because they're sort of little digital things that flicker and they don't capture, but it does say downtown Highway 17 ramp closed. So that was moved to the center median, and we think that that's a more impactful location for that particular sign. Some of the interesting things that we learned along the way. This is a sign that says that the ramp's closed, use the ramp at Highway 9, directing people to the right. You can see by the queue of cars that all of them are ignoring the sign, and that's been one of the challenges, is that folks are looking at their phones and paying attention to the mapping software and not necessarily following the signage. So although signage is a significant element, it is not always 100% successful. This one's a little washed out in the light, but it says road closed ahead. And again, you can see it's a sign that's right there across from the plaza. You can see that folks continue to ignore those signs, and we have a queue. This is a Saturday picture, a queue of folks headed south in spite of the sign that's right there. I want to run a quick video for Saturday for you to show you some of the things, and then I'm going to use all of our technology today. So I'm going to switch from PowerPoint to a video, and then to the overhead. So this is the roundabout and some of the traffic that we saw on Saturday. I thought it was enlightening to see just the sheer volume of vehicles that we experienced on that day. We were successful in that our biggest concern was creating a significant health and safety challenge. The biggie there is the off-ramp from Highway 17, and if that off-ramp, because it ultimately becomes what we call the number one lane, or the fast lane, if that were to queue towards the freeway, it would become a potential safety hazard. So we were watching that. We did have to manage traffic manually several times to allow that traffic to flow in. If you're familiar with the traffic circle, the traffic within the circle has the right-of-way, so the cars entering the circle have to queue, and that can create a bit of a backup. So we periodically stop that traffic to allow for a flow of traffic. So there is a manual element as well to the efforts. I did provide the council and those present with handouts, and I did provide them via email to Councilmember Rennie shortly before the meeting, so you all have that information. I wanted to go through a couple of highlights on this information. I will say that the information we have, this is generally data that we have from data collection over the weekend and tube counts that we did over the weekend. We do have, and you may have seen them, these funky-looking data collectors strapped to various poles in the downtown. Those are collecting information at the intersections for all movements at the intersection. So we'll know in all kinds of gory detail what's going on at the intersections and be able to report back on that. But in the short time that we had, it was not information we were able to obtain. But we do have tube count information, which is information as cars pass a particular point on the roadways where we have the tube counters, and also some drive time information that our consultant was able to collect for us. And I'll go over that real quick. And I think some of the information is interesting and starts to play off itself a little bit. So in your packet, you have this sheet which shows southbound Los Gatos Boulevard travel time runs. All of your versions are color. On the color versions, the top blue line shows the Saturday traffic run. There's a gray line that's sandwiched in between there, and that shows the weekend before. So not this weekend, but the weekend before, when there was a much lighter traffic level. And then the lower blue line shows the Sunday traffic. So you can see that the traffic that we experienced shows an impact, a more significant impact on the Saturday throughout town, not just in the downtown area. So this is a drive time to summarize from the southbound, the Highway 85 off-ramp at Los Gatos Boulevard, all the way to the Wood Road closure, and the various time checks along the way to show you the time that took. And then on the other side, you have the University Avenue travel time, and this one shows more reflective of the downtown, what happens on that travel time. This has the Saturday, which is a 32-minute time frame, and the Sunday, which is a shorter time frame. So you can see a significant impact in the drive time to get through the downtown, and you can see the exponential increase as the vehicles reached Blossom Hill Road and the congestion as it got closer and closer to the downtown. And in a much bigger version, and I'm going to go across this, I'll pull it across so we can see it. And I'm going to orient you a little bit to the information on this page. There's a lot of information. We've collected a significant amount of data in a short period of time. I've circled the points that I really want to talk about, but I've provided you all of the data. And our analysis is very preliminary at this point, so we'll continue to work through these numbers as we collect the information and are able to further understand it. But there's some first impressions that we've seen that we wanted to share with you. So the first sheet, and at the top of the sheet, it identifies the route. So this is Highway 9. The first column is the location. So the top level here is mid-block between Santa Cruz and University Avenue. And then going across each column provides additional information. So the first two are pre-closure on the Saturday and Sunday, and they show an ADT, or the number of vehicles that we counted on those days, as well as the count of vehicles in the closure time frame, so the 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. time. And we also identify a peak hour, so what the hour was in terms of a clock hour. So 11 a.m. on that first column was the peak hour for the day, and that during peak hour for the day for that data collection, and that goes across. So the far two columns to the right show the data on the closure. Some interesting things that we saw on the pre-closure Saturday, you can see the circled number at 5,900 in the closure time frame, was on a day when we did not have a closure, was significantly higher than what we saw on the Saturday of the closure at 4,900. So in spite of not having a closure on the pre-Saturday, the traffic was not as impactful to the downtown. Not quite sure what that tells us. There's some theories that we'll talk about as we get towards the end. You'll also see that on Sunday we had a higher amount of traffic than we did on Saturday, and yet on Sunday the traffic flowed fairly nicely in the downtown. So interesting data and interesting numbers. They aren't necessarily intuitive in how they all align. I'll go through a couple, and then I'll round back around, come back around on what some of the information means. So the second sheet is Santa Cruz Avenue, and so there's multiple locations that we captured here. On the top row, Santa Cruz Avenue north of Highway 9, we see similar numbers where we had a pre-closure number of 3,700 and a closure number of 3,100. So very close numbers in the traffic impacts on the downtown were somewhat different. On the area on Santa Cruz Avenue south of Highway 9, so this is immediately entering the downtown area, again with hose counts, there was a significantly higher number on the pre-closure Saturday than we experienced during the closure time frame on the Saturday of this last weekend. And then if you go down to the blue boxes, I will point out that there you have a red section on your spreadsheet there. Tube counts aren't necessarily completely foolproof. In this particular case, there was a vehicle parked on top of the tube count, which keeps it from functioning. So that data is somewhat questionable, and we'll have to adjust for that. That's one of the good things about having the additional counters at the intersections. We'll be able to essentially recreate this data and even do it in more granular detail. As we look at the blue boxes, you can see interesting information again on the south of Broadway area of Santa Cruz. So this is getting closer to the closure. If you notice on Saturday, 1,700 and going southbound, and even more, 2,400 coming northbound. So a significant amount of traffic coming into town Same on Sunday, a significant amount of traffic coming into town, very light numbers going southbound, and that reflects what we saw out in the field on Sunday, which was a much lighter traffic. I will say that Sunday is a bit of an anomaly. There's a lot going on Sunday in the downtown area with the farmers market that adds to the traffic and destinations, and also with the music that goes on in Civic Center. All bring people in and can affect the numbers. We think that the Saturday to Saturday comparison is probably a much better look at the information, the data. And finally, we have some information on University Avenue. On the pre-closure Saturday and the closure Saturday, we saw significantly lower numbers on University. Again, information that we're going to have to work through. We also saw, interestingly, more vehicles in this particular case on Sunday. It's not a number I circled, but here are the 2,000 numbers. So it appears that even though there was traffic along University, the town was able to handle that and manage it fairly well. So some of the information that we saw out of this, and some of the questions that we've asked ourselves. One of the biggies is, how are our intersections functioning? So the intersections affect the congestion in the downtown significantly, and that the traffic has to flow through an intersection, and the intersections can hold things up. We did a significant amount of work at Main and Santa Cruz. We extended the green headed sort of north and south to facilitate flow through there. And I think that helped significantly. There's potential additional work that needs to occur on along Highway 9, and that's work we'll need to do with Caltrans. The data collection that we're doing will help facilitate that. Caltrans has asked for that information, so this will allow us the opportunity to provide it. So Highway 17 is a significant question for us, so if there's, and it may explain some of these numbers that seem sort of backwards to us in terms of where we're seeing the increase in numbers and the impacts on traffic. But if 17 is flowing freely, and we're still seeing folks come through town, for instance, through Highway 9, and their habits bring them through town, their travel times and the number of vehicles may be able to be accommodated because there's a release at the other end. They're able to get onto 17 at Highway 9 fairly easily, and so that relieves the congestion, allows them to move through. And then the perception for us is that it's a light traffic day. All of this is information that hopefully the additional data that we collect will enlighten us on. We have a significant amount of that data already, and it's just a matter of getting through and processing that. It will be a monumental amount of information that we'll have, and it'll take some weeding through to get through. Capturing the rest of my notes here. The mapping seems to be a significant element. Standing at the traffic circle and observing folks as they look at their phone and then look perplexed at, okay, what's going on here as we reach the end of this roadway, and our map says we can go through, and yet the roadway's blocked. What do we do here? And the number of people who asked for directions when they got to the traffic circles, asking how do I get to Highway 17 now that I'm here? Which is a little confusing for us, since there was quite a bit of signage along the way providing them that information, and again reinforces what we saw in the pictures, is that the signage may not be the end-all be-all for the solutions. So certainly some work that needs to be done there, and some additional data crunching and information processing that we need to do. Our current direction from the council is to continue this for 2 additional weekends, including the 4th of July weekend. I would point out that on our heavy day, we saw around 5,000 vehicles. Over Memorial Day weekend, on Saturday, we saw 7,000 vehicles in the downtown and 7,200 on Sunday. So that's a lot more vehicles in the downtown area. If the 4th of July weekend pans out to be anything like that, we would expect that will be a capacity that we may not be able to handle. And it leads me into sort of where I want to wrap is, the roadways have a finite capacity to handle vehicles, and I think that for folks going to the beach, that's Highway 17 and their ability to get over the hill. But our local roadways as well have a finite capacity to handle those vehicles, and eventually it compounds itself. And once somebody sat in their car at a particular location for a number of minutes, they're going to be looking for alternatives, and even if they don't know that it goes somewhere, they'll be searching that out. Our closures on Massal and Tate, I think, have been effective. They've relieved some of the pressures and really helped us to establish that quality of life in those Almond Grove area that the town is proud of. I think the closure may have had some ramifications, especially north of Highway 9, where there's been some sort of additional spillover and additional crowding. And that we may see continue if we continue with the closure, even if it gets to be something that folks have learned about and have accommodated in their travels. There's just a large number of vehicles that are looking to make that pass over the hill to Santa Cruz. So with that, that's a bunch of information for you. I'm here. Our consultant Jaime Rodriguez from Traffic Patterns is here, right behind me, as are Lisa and Jesse Poo, our traffic engineer. If you have questions, we're certainly here to answer.
Okay, let me start out by saying thank you and look for questions. Ms. Jensen.
Actually, I have a process question that may not be for Mr. Morley, may be for Ms. Pavetti. What exactly does the council have the power to do tonight? Are we simply listening to information and saying, okay, thank you? Or do we have the power to reconsider our decision to close roads?
You have the power to reconsider your decision. We are ready to continue to implement for the remaining 2 weekends as directed by council earlier, as described by Director Morley. However, based on the information, if council has modifications to that direction, we stand ready to be able to implement accordingly.
Thank you.
Mr. Rennie.
Thank you. That's Mayor Spector. I have a question for Director Morley. So the car count numbers, as you said, seem to be upside down, and I'm finding that they're maybe not as useful as the wait times, or maybe you, after more analysis, can make them more useful. Or maybe it's that we're supposed to read them backwards. If the car count is lower, it means the street's so clogged up, nothing's moving. And maybe we should be reading them that way. But then how do we know when there just isn't a lot of car to use those numbers? I think my question really is more around, I got a lot of emails from people saying, you know, things were better, good job, keep at it. But you showed me a video of a constant stream of cars being turned around, and the wait times look much longer, even in the downtown portion, than they were before. And it looked like they grew in the downtown a lot more than they did in the non-closure weekend. Is your assessment that things were better or worse?
Thank you for the question. The traffic on Saturday was certainly much worse than we had expected and anticipated. And in fact, the traffic, because it was two-way congestion, so that it wasn't just a one-way out of town, but two-way going out of town and then sort of back around, back into downtown, in some ways was much worse. Especially from a life safety perspective and getting emergency vehicles around where ordinarily they'd be able to use the alternate lane. They wouldn't necessarily be able to do so on a day like Saturday. So to be fair, I probably should have shown a video of Sunday as well, which was significantly more clear than Saturday. As much as we'd like to take credit for having a super successful implementation, we always have that doubt in our mind that maybe Sunday doesn't necessarily reflect it. Certainly there are some efforts that we did and some changes that we made along the way to notify folks, and I think the data reflects a little bit of that. But we do have concerns about it, the next heavy day, and what does that look like for the downtown, and what's the impact? And the question that we ask ourselves a lot is what is the threshold for saying, okay, this isn't working, and picking up the traffic circle or the closure and allowing traffic to flow through. So we're continuing to work on it, to evaluate and to adjust as we go, to try and deliver the best situation for the downtown. Again, it's a quality of life thing from our perspective, and how can we continue to assist the town in retaining that quality of life that everybody enjoys. And certainly there's some choices here along the way. Another thing to consider is that I think at one point the downtown came into being because it was a throughway for traffic. And we need to be cognizant of what the businesses need in terms of having folks come through town and fully cutting them off, and what ramifications of a closure might be over the long term. We also have some considerations with our partners, for instance, Caltrans, on ensuring that we're working with them. Caltrans was out working with us alongside of us all weekend, so there was a representative doing their observations. They've been exceptionally supportive to this point of our work, and so I'd like to acknowledge them for that.
Mr. Rennie, further questions?
So a follow-up question. So you said that you adjusted signage. Is there opportunities to do more with signs? Because it seemed like, as you showed, people were just ignoring the signs. Will it just take another weekend for them to learn not to ignore the signs? Or is there something more you think you can do? And then related to that, was there a sign on Ridgecrest? It seemed like a lot of cars, somebody had said there was an email, there was a lot of cars going down Broadway and turning. If we didn't have a sign on Ridgecrest, I didn't know.
We did, that was one of the Ridgecrest sign was one that we made an adjustment on, and we added that sign in. That seemed to help a little bit. There was no outlet from Ridgecrest, so once they got into the downtown, they still had to go back the other direction. But we did experience some queuing, especially along Main Street and Broadway to some extent from traffic coming from through what we anticipate was the Ridgecrest area. We don't stop sort of doing the adjustments and the modifying and the learning. So there's some adjustments we'll do in terms of signage and language and trying to get the information out to redirect folks. So we'll continue to do that through the next 2 weekends.
Further questions?
And one more question if I could. Do you feel, so I was sort of expecting downtown to get better. It didn't. And I was expecting north of Route 9 to be worse. Do you feel like you have adequate ways if we made the north part of town worse, or how much worse? And I guess I mean more than just 10th of 9, a little bit further beyond that. Do you feel like you're adequately monitoring what we're doing to the north end of town or central end of town?
So you had referenced in your previous question the combination of the drive time information as well as the sort of the traffic counts, and I think those the two sources or two types of information combined help to educate us more than one would all by itself. And the reason I wanted you to see the drive time on Los Gatos Boulevard was to demonstrate that there is a potential increase in vehicle impact outside of the downtown as we're forcing people from entering the downtown. I think it's like water filling a cup full of holes. It's gonna find a hole to make its way out of, and if we plug the ones on the downtown side, it's gonna spill over into other areas.
Mr. Rennie?
Okay, thank you.
I see no other questions of staff. So thank you. And I do have some cards. If anyone wants to address us, please submit a card. Start with, looks like Kevin or Kevin Fellini.
Thank you. So thanks for again. Beach traffic's not going to go away. So my measure of success, or my bar for success, is not that we're traffic free. I want to start with that. Traffic in Los Gatos in general at this point is fairly deplorable, and the addition of the development in the North 40 has led some of my friends from neighboring towns to say they're never coming here again. But I'll get back to the issue of beach traffic. Success to me is that there's a manageable amount of traffic in town so that residents can enjoy a minimum of congestion and disruption to their lives and neighborhoods. Merchants enjoy business from diners and shoppers, and emergency services can move freely throughout the town. I will say that what was just described was completely different from what I witnessed. I walked around the town and I saw something very different. Now, I will admit very freely, I live on the north side of Highway 9. I live on Roberts Road. I actually decided around 1:30, 2 o'clock on the afternoon on Saturday that I was going to go out in my car. I got to the end of the driveway and realized I could not do that. Instead, I took some videos. I'm not going to show them to you. But Roberts Road, looping around from Blossom Hill, as well as University Avenue, as well as Blossom Hill, as well as Industrial Way and Santa Cruz were all completely gridlocked that afternoon. However, I got happier as I walked, because when I went downtown, what I saw was that Santa Cruz Avenue southbound was completely free. Now, northbound was absolutely clogged, but Almond Grove was empty, Santa Cruz Avenue was free, and it was actually a much better town. There was the possibility that if somebody wanted to go and shop or dine, they could do that. They might wait a while to get back out. And then Sunday was an awful lot better. So what I ask you is to stay the course. It's early. Obviously, the backups did push into the north side of Highway 9, and that's a challenge. I'm willing to accept that because I think we're on the right track. To go a couple more weekends and things don't get better, okay, so be it. But I ask you to fight them on their way to the beaches. Fight them in our driveways, in our roads, in our parking lots, and never surrender, never surrender, never, never, never surrender. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. Angelia Dorner?
Had an answer for everybody, I think. Angelia Dorner, proud resident of the Almond Grove. First thing I thought of on Saturday, especially with getting feedback from people coming in from north of town, was the 1970s song. Signs, everywhere there's signs, blocking out the scenery, breaking up my mind. Unfortunately, there weren't enough signs. The signs were not north, which is where we need to catch the traffic before they come into town. But I'll hit that in a moment. There is discussion that people were saying, gee, it pushes the traffic somewhere else other than downtown. I would just ask that everyone revisit Memorial Day and all of the council materials that related to the last time we had this on topic. Every artery in town was impacted on Memorial Day to the same degree. I also just want to say that I walked around. Saturday was horrible. I agree with everybody, but Sunday was fabulous. 12:45 downtown, walked down Santa Cruz and looked at all the parking lots on the east side of Santa Cruz. There was about 70% full of people shopping and eating. Back down at 3, 85% full of all the parking lots. Music in the park was great, et cetera. But the thing that I want to talk about most is the health and safety aspect. I listened to the police dispatch on all days, Saturday, Sunday, and Monday on Memorial Day weekend. I also listened to the police dispatch all day on Saturday and Sunday of this weekend. Memorial Day weekend, without this closure, residents spraying cars with hoses, the people getting sprayed wanting to file charges, calling the police, 10-year-old kid on a bicycle being hit at Tate and Bean, cars trying to hopscotch other cars, throwing things at other windshields of other drivers, SUV halfway down the embankment on Ridgecrest because they tried to do a U-turn, emergency vehicles in video that was provided to you going down the opposite side of the streets on Los Gatos Boulevard, constant horns. Saturday of this week, right during the time when this time thing was done, one semi-truck full of dirt refused to turn around at that circle downtown. Right at this time frame. It took about 35 minutes for the police officer to get there and to give approval for that truck to go through the blockade. So that blocked up everything. Nobody was allowed to move because he had that whole circle area like basically closed up for 35 or 40 minutes right during this time frame. There really were no other police calls over Saturday, at least until 3 o'clock on Sunday, relating to unusual traffic. There were police calls, but they weren't anything at all relating to congestion or fights or altercations or anything like that. So please just think about that, and signs, please, everywhere signs.
Thank you. Seeing no questions. Alice, Weaker or Wheeler?
My name's Ellis Weaker. I live in 197 Vista Del Monte, and I was downtown both on Saturday and Sunday. And I would ask for everyone's patience. I think this is a very good strategy. I think you have to give it some time to play out. You only haven't done it for 2 days. Saturday was a mess. I was down by the circle watching things, and I was very pleased to see that the personnel you've hired were very polite, and they help people. I gave them guidance as to how to turn around. But the fact was, most of these people aren't looking at signs. In fact, I was watching someone who was kind of like this, driving past a sign, was looking at his iPhone, trying to figure out why Waze had failed him. It's always been good in the past. Why now is it failing me? So I think you have to understand people's habits. Sunday was an amazing day. Not only was the weather cooperative, but so was the beach traffic, because it wasn't downtown. It was great. I don't know about these numbers. I've never, cannot understand how what I saw when I took pictures of is so different from the data that you distributed. Something is not right, and I don't know what it is, but I took pictures and I posted them of empty streets. North Santa Cruz, south, just before the circle that you had people turning around. I had pictures where there was not one car, maybe two or three, totally different from the day before. So I would just advise you to stay the course like the first person who spoke did. Thank you.
Thank you. Bruce McCombs, my last card.
Bruce McComb, 16160 Kennedy Road in Los Gatos. I just wanted to take a minute to thank Matt Morley for the effort that he's putting out. Traffic is driving us nuts. Traffic is driving us nuts, but Saturday looked pretty bleak. Sunday, as everyone has spoken, there's a difference. We need to stay the course. I'm pleased with it. And again, with all that Matt's doing, paving our street, Kennedy Road, Kennedy Court, meeting with me, I think, later in the week to talk about a project around around Kennedy Meadows. The guy's busy and still devoting his time on the weekends to get this thing straightened out, and I'm grateful. I'm grateful to everybody. I think we're making progress. Sunday looked like a different town, and I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Ed Rathman?
Good evening. My name's Ed Rathman. I guess we can all agree that Saturday was a disaster, but my question is why? Why was Saturday good? And why was Saturday bad and Sunday less traffic? I think we got to answer that question. I'm the managing partner of Willow Street and Main Street Burgers, and our business Saturday was off by 50%. And we need to understand why that was. Sunday was probably off by 25%. Sunday, actually, I was downtown both days. Sunday felt much more like empty. It felt, there was such a contrast between Saturday and Sunday. I really don't understand what was going on. And before we, make any final decisions, we got to figure that out. Because what happened Saturday was just, it was just a mess, a disaster to business. The point was made by that, for 100 years, Santa Cruz Avenue has been a flow street, onto the road to Santa Cruz. And to change something like that, we better be absolutely certain we know what we're doing before we mess with something like that. The unintended consequences could be gigantic. And I'm not even sure 3 weekends of study is enough. So we need to really be careful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Leonardis?
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Mr. Rathman, what proximity to your restaurants was this traffic circle? How close was it?
Probably 100 yards.
Do you feel like it may have provided like a psychological barrier to people? They were more focused on just getting in the circle and turning around than actually trying to park and stop at your restaurant, or?
I'm not sure. I really don't know. The traffic getting into downtown was backed up to at least Knowles on Winchester. It was so impacted. It was on Saturday. It was just amazing. Sunday, it was easy to get downtown.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Last card. Patricia Ernstrom?
Thank you very much. Just wanted to say again, really appreciate everybody trying to find solutions, because it's, as we've all spent a lot of time talking here, there are lots of issues related to parking. And I guess the other thing that we're focused on is kind of what's happening on the weekend, but I think that one of the things that you've heard in recent months is it's not just the weekends, it's during the week as well. So for those of us who commute to and from other places back and forth to Los Gatos, I think that that's a really important consideration as we're looking at what the overall problem is and what we're dealing with in terms of density and the number of cars on the streets. And as Director Morley was talking, we're talking about, you know, the addition of all the projects that are on the horizon. And one of the things you opened with is that our roads can only take so much traffic. And amen. I mean, there's nothing more true than that. I think as it relates to the pilot programs, just looking at what the opportunities are for residents themselves to get home. I live on Bachman Avenue, can't get there from here. And so the choices that we're now making not to go places, and so while we appreciate the overall trying to reprogram people's traffic patterns, I think a lot of the people who are cutting through aren't necessarily regular commuters, and they're not doing it every day. So we may train them, but they're not necessarily coming back through to try to get to Santa Cruz or the beach the next weekend or the next month. So I think I'd like to consider the local traffic only and consider enforcement and ticketing as a method of deterrence as opposed to just closing the road, and what the viability and what the opportunities are there for not only revenue of the town. People hopefully might read the signs if there's an opportunity that they might get a ticket if they violate that, rather than just starting to close roads and creating the chaos that we saw. The video that I have from Sunday actually is a 334, and it's a huge line of traffic. And also, you know, I was really surprised downtown how many parking places were available, which meant that somehow on Sunday I think people were just generally avoiding downtown. But anyway, thank you very much for all of the work that you're doing, and we really appreciate the seeking of solutions. But I would caution before anything becomes permanent that we have some more opportunity to dialogue about this. Thank you.
Thank you. No questions. Now I have my last card, unless somebody brings one up. Linda Kaplinger.
Hi there, Linda Kaplinger again. I have a couple diagrams with chicken scratches from when I've been sitting here. I just put some numbers together really quickly. We live at 243 Jones Road, which is up on College Hill, but we also have a house at 326 University. Both houses are in the downtown area, so both of them are really impacted. Up on College Hill, we have really one way in and out, which is going up College or coming back down Pageant, but it all funnels into one area. This is the data for University, though. But if you see on Saturday, going southbound, we had a 38% drop in cars going southbound heading towards the turnaround. And on Sunday, we had a 17% drop week over week with the closure. So it seems successful going southbound heading towards Santa Cruz. On Sunday, or Saturday, week over week, coming northbound, we had a 6% drop. Not that much, but the data on the lower part is really dependent on the upper part. If there's a turnaround on the test weekends, not on the control weekend, that data is going to be affected, right? Because people are turning around and coming back through. So I wouldn't really expect to see a huge amount of change on the northbound, especially when we're funneling people back this way. So we think it's a huge success on University Avenue. Let me show you one other set of. And this is to Angelia's point, that we didn't have enough signs out. We were discussing and feel that if we could actually keep people from getting off at Lark, that would be instrumental in keeping people from impacting not only the downtown area, but the area between Highway 9 and Lark. So putting in signs at the 85 Los Gatos Boulevard exit, possibly something up at the north part on Camden as they're getting on 17, and also at Winchester and 85. Those three key areas could really help keep people from getting off of 17 at Lark and then building all the congestion up. Another thing that we'd like to ask is that there's no interruption, that we continue on through to Labor Day. I think that you guys are going on recess till the first week of August, is that right? And so if we stop this the weekend after July 4th, there's going to be this period where we can't, as far as I understand, can't reach out to you to have this turned back on if we do find that it's being successful. And the last thing, and I realize I'm out of time, is that we feel that 3 o'clock really isn't enough. I made multiple ventures out on Saturday and Sunday, and at 3 o'clock going over Main, Highway 17 is completely packed. I would suggest keeping the blockage up till 4 or even 5 o'clock if possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason Farwell?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Council members, my only comment is it's kind of piggybacking on Mr. Rathman, just the concern for the downtown business district and what impact this will have on business. And we don't know, and I would just encourage the council and town staff to reach out to the retailers downtown, the restaurateurs, et cetera, just to find out exactly what impact this is having on business. Because obviously we all appreciate the quality of life here, and we want it to be as good as it can be, but I also don't want to crush downtown and the business owners down there. I think the fact that Mr. Rathman's quoting a 50% reduction on Saturday is pretty drastic, and then a 25% on Sunday is, again, pretty darn drastic. And if those numbers continue, you're not going to have people in business downtown. So I just please consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Jan-Eric Nordmo?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and council members. I have a few comments. I'm not petitioning one direction or the other on whether we continue this or not. However, some observations. The first observation is on Saturday. Well, firstly, I went out the previous Saturday and this Saturday and did my own very unscientific study. But on this Saturday, the good thing is we solved our parking problem because there were a lot of parking spaces available Saturday. The unfortunate thing, and I do want to echo our residents, fellow residents' comments there, and our restaurateur, is the businesses were impacted by it tremendously. I polled 5 businesses, and each business indicated that there was a challenge with the amount of business that were coming in on Saturday. And they also indicated that there was a very big challenge with their employees getting into town for work. So what Director Morley has stated before is that you can, yes, plug up one hole, but that's going to force the cup to fill up in other directions. And so as part of my unscientific study, the previous Saturday, I drove into town from 3 different locations, Highway 9, Los Gatos Boulevard, and Blossom Hill. And the traffic was not as bad to come in. On last Saturday, it definitely was far worse. So there is an effect on one side where you impact another. So there is going to be some challenges there, and I hope that we're cognitive of all of that. Certainly, I think as a resident that lives right downtown, I benefited tremendously because I didn't have to see cars speeding by. They were crawling by. It was safe for me and my dog. But there were challenges for other parts of the community. So I hope we take a holistic approach to this and that we also consider the folks that are in the north part of town and central part of town. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no other cards. Seeing no one coming forward, I'm closing the public testimony portion of this matter and look to the council for comments, questions. Sayak.
Thank you. So before I begin, I do want to, I know Matt has been thanked, but I want to just thank again Director Morley, Lisa Peterson, Jessica Pugh, and this is a tremendous problem that I know that you guys have been thinking about for many, many weeks now. And the contractors that were hired on Saturday and Sunday, I have to say, I thought they were professional. Everyone that I have talked to said that they were doing their job well. And in a very trying time, I just want to say thank you because we all appreciate the work that you're doing. I know that going into this, we knew that there were going to be challenges and that we knew basically it would get worse before it would improve. What I'd like to know, a couple of questions first, was if we had any opportunity to hear from the chamber what feedback they were able to collect, because we were trying to work with the chamber so that they could be our conduit for the business reactions. And also, if there was any more official data on what the emergency responses were from Chief Fisbee and his group. I know that was something that we had asked for collection of, but I wasn't sure if we had any preliminary information you can share today.
Certainly. One of the pieces of public comment that we included with the report last evening was a summary from the Chamber's newsletter that went out electronically, and it highlighted some of the comments that they obtained at a meeting that they held earlier in the week. I'm sorry, I'm not able to put my finger on it, but it is in the documentation that was sent out yesterday. We did talk with Chief Frisbee, and we appreciate the thanks to the Parks and Public Works staff as well as our consultants and contractors. Thanks also needs to go to our officers who are on the ground responding as needed in the field over the weekend. The dispatch data did not indicate any serious concern, so it appears that public safety was able to do its job over the weekend.
Further questions? Well, let me jump in with comments and observations. First of all, Mr. Morley and company and contractor, thank you very much. You know, when you're sitting up here, you get all of us get a lot of emails, and when people are stuck in traffic on Saturday, you really get a lot of emails. But having said that, there were two observations I could make, and one is that consistent with Mr. Morley's statistics, the situation was better on Sunday than it was on Saturday. And after you deal with a lifelong of challenges and difficulties, you realize that there is rarely, if ever, a slam dunk solution that I go through life thinking, am I trending up or am I trending down? Well, with our work over the weekend or your work over the weekend, we are trending up in my observation. The other thing that we get up here is, have you been in town this past weekend? Well, the answer is yes. We were on Highway 9, Highway 17 South, Highway 17 North, getting off at your traffic circle, checking out the traffic circle, and then, you know, seeing what the traffic was like. Saturday on Santa Cruz Avenue, my observation, there was a lot of places to park and not much going on. Then let's go to Sunday. Sunday, the signage was better, and everything was moving much better. This time, we walked all the way down towards on Main Street toward Highway 9 and then back around to see how that was doing, and it was progressing much better. And I really thought that a lot of it had to do with the signage. So I think we're trending up, and that's a good thing. With regard to the chamber, an issue was raised with regard to the chamber. The chamber did have a meeting on this issue, and I can't remember if it was in our packet or if I got it separately as an email, but their consensus was similar to what we've heard, which was, you know, it's better, it needs more work, but it's better, and so keep at it. The parking on Santa Cruz Avenue, again, my observation on Sunday, at least there were people parked there, and they were walking around doing things, so this is good. And that's all I have right now. Ms. Jensen.
Okay, so I will weigh in with observations and comments as well. On Saturday morning at about 9 o'clock, or every Saturday morning, I travel to San Jose. I did that on this past Saturday, and already at about 9 o'clock, traffic coming southbound on 17 was backed up almost to Hamilton. When I came back, I thought, I'll go around on Highway 87, because I can do that, and come north on 85, and exit on Los Gatos Boulevard, which was already backed up to turn left from the freeway, which was backed up all the way down Los Gatos Boulevard. Sometimes I turn off on, I'm not going to tell my secrets, but sometimes I turn off on Samaritan, and then I turn on National, and then I'm going to come through town. That was a disaster. And it was also a disaster on Shannon, on Inglewood, on Kennedy, at the intersection of Kennedy and Highway 9, and Highway 9 to the freeway. I had to go back out to a graduation party, ironically, on Saturday at 2 o'clock in Santa Clara, came back down 17, and it was also when I was queuing to get from where I live to get onto Kennedy and then onto the freeway, could not do it. Cars were all the way up Kennedy. They were blocking the intersections on that side of town. You could not go down to the freeway. Motorcycles and cars were going on the right to get around, so that if you wanted to go north on 17, you were going to create a danger for all kinds of people. And when I finally got on the freeway, by that time 17 was backed up at least to Hamilton, if not further. So Sunday was better. Why would I say Sunday's better? My estimation, well, it's Sunday. Not as many people go to the beach. The weather was better. It wasn't as hot, so why not stick around? So I would attribute it to that, not our actions. So while I was observing this, I have to say that I was reconsidering my vote to do the pilot program and Los Gatos' role as part of a greater community. The traffic is a regional issue. When we take an action in Los Gatos, it affected the freeways all the way up and down. And I had to wonder, well, what would I think if I went to Santa Clara and they'd closed it down because they didn't want my car there and I needed to go to the graduation party? Would I think that was fair? Would I think it was reasonable? Would I think that they were contributing to a regional traffic solution or a regional traffic problem? And I would hope that we in Los Gatos would want to be part of a regional solution, that we don't want to be the city that thinks it, or the town that thinks it's an island. And we got information from our town lawyer that he gave us a case. I'm a lawyer, so sorry. And there's a 1991 Court of Appeals case that basically says, well, I'll even say it. Can a local authority implement the circulation element of its general plan by closing a regional roadway in order to prevent the local inconveniences created by large volumes of through traffic through the local authority's jurisdiction? We answer both these questions in the negative, i.e. no. So there is a court case out there that says that we do have to be part of a greater community and a regional solution. And I would hope that we would take the opportunity to reconsider our decision and understand that when we block, like Director Morley said, when we put a dam one place, that water's going to go all over every place else. And we need to actually say to ourselves that we need to be part of the solution and creating regional solutions. And I'll just add, a very smart person that I know who happens to have a lot of expertise in this area says that information technology is here to stay. We're just delivering it through ways in a very inefficient way. So the notion that the person was not looking at the sign, was looking at his app. I know all kinds of people that do that. They don't look at signs, they look at apps. And that the app is, you're going to deliver information efficiently. People demand that, and they want it to be unbiased. So we could tell Waze, we can give them information, but Waze is going to produce information that people are wanting to have. That's why it's a popular application. And this very smart person also said that Waze is just the new modern version of the guy in the helicopter that says, it's backed up there, go over there. So we really need to be looking at, well, how are we going to keep 17 flowing smoothly? Because as Director Morley said on Sunday, when it was flowing smoothly, traffic was better. Because if that's a better route, people will take it. If it's not a better route, they won't. So I would hope that the council would seriously reconsider the pilot program for closing. I don't think it was successful. I don't think it was successful for all parts of the town, and it certainly was not successful for the region, and I would like Los Gatos to be a better neighbor.
Further discussion? Mr. Leonardis. Oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't do that. Mr. Rennie has had his hand up a long time. Mr. Rennie.
I'm off mute, I think. Thank you, Mayor Spector. Couple comments. I was not in town to observe, as others have mentioned. As I said before, I had a death in the family, so I spent 18 hours driving to Montana. Probably not as frustrating as driving in Los Gatos, but I did spend some time in the car. But the first thing I was going to mention, there was talk about the chamber. The chamber's planning a discussion session at 8:30 on July 19th. That's Tuesday, after all the pilots. And if I believe I'm going to be able to attend it. So I think Mr. Farwell mentioned that. talk to the merchants and so forth. So I'm hoping to get feedback then from them and attend in here firsthand. Since I wasn't in town, I was reading all the Nextdoor posts carefully and the many emails we got. There must have been 50 or 60 emails, I think. So I was listening to all of those things. I would with Councilmember Jensen. Being a scientist, I don't think you can make decisions based on one data point. Is Saturday and Sunday 2 data points, or is it one weekend and 1 data point? I'm not sure. Either way, 1 or 2 data points is not a good way to make a decision. I think we need to try some more weekends, and then we also need to measure some weekends where we don't have it closed, taking into account the temperature and so forth, also, or how things are going on 17, so we can. And like I questioned before, also measuring the more north side of town, or at least it's really central part of town. One other comment I would make is we're starting the closing at 9, and I know a lot of the negative emails we got were pretty much all the mountain folks and a few others. We started closing at 9 because we thought that the apps would learn. Well, they don't seem to be learning, so I would request that he try some days where they don't start at 9 because the traffic isn't bad yet. Start later at 10 or so, because if we were to do something permanent, I don't think we would want to start at 9. We'd want to start somewhat later to reduce impact, folks. I know somebody wanted to do it later. I'm hesitant to go that way too. We need to look more carefully at that, but I would request that look at doing some short, just so we get more data. Thank Director Morley and all his team for all their effort, and I have a lot of confidence in their ability to adjust and try new things. And they adjusted some on Sunday, and it's hard to tell how much it helped because 17 seemed to be better. So for me, that's another reason why I want to continue trying another 1 or 2 more weekends. Our plan is 2 more weekends, one with a busy weekend and maybe one with less busy weekend, and give them a chance to adjust some more and see what else they can do. I've seen before they are quite creative, and I think they haven't used up all the tricks in their bag yet. So I would say let's stay the course a while longer. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. My primary concern, of course, is the health and safety of the community and the peace and quiet of the residents, but also the business community and those patrons who would be patronizing those businesses, but who are so frustrated or who are so confused that they choose to turn around and get back on a freeway when they may otherwise have stopped. So that is a great concern to me. I thought it would be a good idea to put, again, gates, perhaps temporary gates where we can drill holes in the ground and put a pole there and say resident traffic only on streets like Ridgecrest, Masole, and Tate, and you'd only have to have them going in, say right off of Highway 9. We don't have to do it all the way across, and have volunteers out there to say resident traffic only, and then leave the ramp to Santa Cruz open. That would be what I would think would work best. Again, here we are trying to outsmart people and outsmart apps and outsmart all kinds of companies like Google and Apple and Waze and whatever else. But the reality is it's kind of like every man for himself. It's kind of a free-for-all out there. We're getting overrun by traffic, and all we could do is block the flow from coming through certain areas. But we don't want to block the flow going through the areas that are important, like the business community. And I didn't see much value in having them go all the way up North Santa Cruz, sit in traffic, and then turn all the way around and go through traffic all the way back. I understand that's our alternative to closing the ramp, which we've received much feedback on as being a potential solution. But I think the better solution would be to just keep those Ridgecrest, Tate, Masole closed, to keep the quiet enjoyment of those neighborhoods, and then keep North Santa Cruz ramp open. And that would be my feedback. And if you're coming to Los Gatos and you live here, try to take Highway 87 to Highway 85 and find an alternative route, as Councilmember Jensen has suggested. And I'm not going to give away street names and things because I don't want people to come after me and say, why did you tell him that? but that is, generally speaking, a better approach. That Highway 17 going into Lark Avenue and beyond, all the way backing up to Hamilton, we are going to be plagued with that forever. If we're not going to widen Highway 17, then we're not going to ever solve that problem. Every commute on the way home, every single day, every hot day, you could pretty much count on it, as someone had said, 9 to 3 or 4 or 5 on Saturday on those warm days. Less traffic on Sunday because probably less people go to the beach, or probably because people stay over, or probably because people said, wait a minute, I did that yesterday. But I don't want to send the message to the world that Los Gatos is closed for business and don't drive through. It's unrealistic. And I think ultimately we got to be really careful with what we do here, because it can hurt us economically. People will just stop showing up, but they'll still try to show up and cut through somehow.
Anyone else? All right. Well, we have no further questions, and I have no further cards, so I will close this portion of our hearing and turn to the council for questions, input. Is staff looking for a motion or just discussion, or what?
You have an opportunity to provide us specific direction for the upcoming weekends. If there are no more comments, then we will proceed for the remaining 2 weekends. As has been advised by our town attorney, this is a temporary partial closure for just these 3 weekends. On August 2nd, we have the opportunity to continue our discussion and determine next steps at that time.
Thank you. Ms. Jensen.
Not going to make a motion, but I just want to state for the record that I would be advocating ending the pilot program now for the reasons I stated earlier.
Further discussion? Ms. Sayak?
So this is not a motion either, since we're just providing feedback. As a scientist as well, advocate more data. So it's hard to make a judgment from one weekend. So I'd like to stay the course the next 2 weekends. In terms of reconsidering, the one thing that I've been reconsidering significantly, and if we are looking at regional solutions and looking at all possible tricks in our bag, I do want, in a future discussion, the idea of improving Highway 17 and expanding it. I know that some of the discussion we've heard is that if you improve 17 flow, this will help negate some of the issues that we're seeing downtown. I know there's pros and cons to this, but I'm quite open to looking at that solution as well.
Further discussion? Well, Mr. Rennie has already spoken. Well, you just have to wait now. Following up or completing what I started before, I also got input from a business on Santa Cruz near Wood Road, and that business, their business went down 4% on Saturday, and it was sort of an empty day for them. But on Sunday, the business was very full and had to bring in all of its employees, all of its staff. So there's one example of what happened in that area. With regard to the traffic study that we are conducting, it indirectly helps our residents and our businesses by having the traffic flow. But given, the example of Caltrans working with our staff and with Mr. Morley, it also is working on getting all traffic moving, and a lot of that traffic that is moving is traffic from all over the region, wherever the state. So it is increasing the traffic flow, not only for us who live here, but for those who are coming through our town. So it is not just a local issue. It is a regional issue. And with regard to widening 17, fortunately or unfortunately, Mr. Morley and I were able to attend many, many meetings on that over the last few months. That included Santa Cruz, VTA, San Jose, Los Gatos. And this issue of widening 17, because there was, back in the 1990s, a concept of widening 17 between Lark and Highway 9, and there were those who thought that that would improve the flow of traffic going to Santa Cruz. And what we learned from VTA was that that would not help. You would need to widen 17 until
Redwood Estates.
Redwood Estates, and that doing 3 lanes each way up to Redwood Estates means you would have to do a lot of inverse condemnation. You would have to, plow out a lot of hillsides and build bridges on the northward bound. And so Caltrans did not recommend that as a solution or issue with regard to this traffic on 17. Further discussion. So I would stay the course. Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Spector. Well, they could build a double-decker or go underground on 17. Then they could double their capacity. But who knows what they'll come up with in the future. Regarding North Santa Cruz, somebody mentioned at our last hearing that what if we put both lanes going southbound on North Santa Cruz one way, so we have double the capacity of North Santa Cruz and leave the exit open. I don't know if that would help, but it would definitely put more cars in the queue, double the amount. And then if we were going to just route them up and turn them around and route them back, that seems kind of counterproductive to me to do that. And then put them back on Highway 9. So maybe that would be an option we can explore going forward. It might be confusing to people at first who are used to going both directions. But I think with the parking lots and then with perhaps University Avenue, the folks, well, the way the traffic works, it's all headed southbound 17 in the morning, so we can do it in the morning and then change it in the afternoon. And it doesn't seem to be as bad in the afternoon coming back because people come back at different times. So that might be one thing if we are going to continue some kind of traffic studies to try to implement more throughput on North Santa Cruz. When it comes to spending, somebody mentioned, one of the speakers mentioned it took 35 minutes for the PD to come and remove that truck. I would hope that the consultant would have the authority to make a judgment call next time, so the PD doesn't have to make their way over there to make that decision, because that probably blocked a lot of people. So whatever we go forward with, I'm hoping that if we run into a situation like that, that somebody can make a judgment call from whoever's standing out there in the circle.
You had staff on site both days. I happened to have been there when that truck was there. PD was there in roughly 5 minutes.
5 minutes?
I made the phone call. Nice thing is we had, obviously cell phone connection, so it was a nice quick phone call, and PD was close by.
Okay, so anyway, I hope that there will be somebody there to just say, go, let that person through. And other than that, again, I'm not really a supporter of closing the ramp on North Santa Cruz at this time anymore, because I feel like the real issue is letting people go to the businesses, letting them continue on. Don't direct the traffic back down Highway 9, which one of the speakers mentioned overflows off of Roberts and University and those places, and then keeping the traffic off of Tate, Masole, and whatever, Ridgecrest. Those would be my goals moving forward.
Further discussion? I see no further discussion. Ms. Pravetti, do you need anything more?
No, based on the comments that we've heard this evening, thank you very much. We will be continuing with the pilot for the remaining 2 weekends. We fully expect this to be a very busy 4th of July weekend given the hot temperatures, so we appreciate everyone's patience as we continue the pilot and learn as much as we can, gathering data, but it will be congested. So thank you for your patience.
Thank you. Hope we're trending up instead of down. All right. Thank you all. And if I can find my gavel, the meeting's adjourned.